Signs. Prologue. Punishment. The pain he experienced as the spiritual hand passed through his body was unbearable, and the dreadful cold the hand left in its wake was unparalleled. He could not suppress the shudder that forced its way up his spine, and he watched in trepidation as the hand moved on to target the body of the child whom he held cradled in his arms. He could only imagine what the owner of that terrible hand was doing to the child's infant soul. The boy began to cry. It brought tears to his own eyes. It wasn't the first time he himself had cried that day. It wasn't second time either. What for? He asked himself. For what did he risk losing everything today? Tonight? Right now? He supplied the answers to his own questions quickly enough. First, there were his subordinates, the people that believed in him and depended on him. Then there was his wife, his beautiful and radiant wife, and finally, his son, the newborn. It would not be long before he lost everything and burdened his son with a curse no child, no human, should ever have to carry. He wanted nothing more than to flee the battlefield and preserve his son from the cruel fate he was going to burden him with. But he wouldn't, couldn't. For Konoha, the roar of pain that the demon uttered and the almost celebratory shouts of the people below him brought him back from his moment of self-loathing. He held his little boy tighter, closer, more tenderly. His mother would never hold him in her hands, and, after what was to come, neither would his father. The boy would never know the loving touch of a parent, or how they would look, or what they wanted to say to him. He was going to condemn his own son to a life of loneliness. It hurt. He gasped, feeling as though his soul was being squeezed and stretched by the owner of the spiritual hand, and he wondered, was his son experiencing the same thing? He hoped not. Angry, vicious torrents of red chakra spiraled and compressed as the last of the jutsu signs wound around the evil chakra before finally settling within the boy's abdomen. The seal shone brightly for a moment before fading into nothing. Up here, with the village at his feet, the man made ready to speak his last words, make his last wish. Naruto, he whispered as more tears crept from his eyes. He paused, carefully forming the wisest, kindest, and most loving words he could to deliver his last message. I am so very sorry. I hope you will forgive me for dying and not being able to be there for you as you grow up. Know that I love you and never plan to leave you alone in this world. You are the most precious thing in this world to me. Another shudder passed through him, but this time it was caused by the icy breath of the death god that lingered behind him. The breath was followed by an otherworldly and cruel laugh. Human, you think that your life is the highest price you can pay for summoning me, a god of death. He gathered all his willpower and forced his head to move to see better over his shoulder at the speaker. His eyes widened at the sight of the being, as frightening as the demon he had just fought, but with an aura of unreachable and unimaginable power. Pale, ghost-like skin, wicked teeth, and two horns protruding from the white hair, a skeletal frame beneath the strange floating fabric it wore, with beads held in one hand and a knife in the other. Here was an entity to be feared. It isn't so, the god continued, evoking an ancient and fundamental terror in the man. What could possibly be any other price? Had he used the seal incorrectly? Performed it wrong? Questions filled the man's mind as he awaited the god's response. Instinctively, he pressed the little baby to his chest. You dare to summon a death god to the realm of the living, and dare to use me to seal a demon into a human child. For that, you will pay with suffering. But rest assured, human, you will not be the only one to suffer. The man behind this attack will not be excused either. He slowly turned to face the god fully, and he felt his body begin to tremble at the thought of what kind of suffering he could have possibly brought upon himself. He stopped breathing abruptly when sharp, all-knowing yellow eyes looked down at the child in his arms. A moment later, the hand holding the beads reached for the newborn and took it from the man. He couldn't move, and no matter how hard he fought it, his body remained motionless. He wept, knowing that his hold on the baby was nothing against that of the death god. The baby made a curious noise and raised its tiny hands to deity, neither knowing nor understanding what it was. The man wanted to speak, to argue with the god, but no words passed his lips, and he realized that even if he could speak, he would only anger the death god even more. Namikaze Minato, the deity began. I hereby strip you of your right to parentage. This shall be your punishment for having the audacity to summon one such as myself. Slowly, its form became transparent, and within a few moments the death god, along with the child, disappeared. In silence and in shock, the Yondaime Hokage stared at the space where they had been. Feeling that the strange aura above him vanished, Gamabunta hummed and looked up. He had suffered a hefty wound that stretched across his left eye, but in spite of that, having a bit of chakra left, he wanted to stay to make sure that Minato was all right. The small figure of his summoner was hunched and shaken, and his silence worried the Toad Boss. Hey kid, what's up? The shinobi of Konoha shouted joyfully and praised their leader, their hero, glad that the fight was finally over. Their hero had defeated the enemy once again, and that meant that their village would continue to live and thrive. From so far down below, they couldn't see the Yondaime's face, so they couldn't see the anguish he expressed. Minato asked the toad again. He received no reply. The death god reappeared above an entirely different village, where a scene similar to the one in Konoha was playing itself out. Fires consumed the buildings, or what was left of them, and ninjas who had survived the battle were making it their business to escape the dangerous heat, leaving the ruined village behind them. Burnt, maimed, and mutilated corpses littered the street, and the vile odor of charred flesh hung heavy in the air. The god looked down at the newborn in its one hand, and with its other touched the baby's stomach. Intricate symbols glowed and answered to the god's calling as his hand guided the seals higher, shifting them to the child's face, and then, along with whisker marks upon his cheeks, the symbols shrank, fixing themselves into the eyes of the child. The large pale hand covered those eyes for a moment before the god removed his hand. He looked down at his handiwork. The boy cried in discomfort, first from the sensations the god's meddling evoked, and second from the impure air the boy was forced, by necessity, to breathe. The boy continued to cry when the death god vanished after setting him on the ground. His pitiful cries were impossibly loud in the abandoned village, whose only inhabitants were now the flames of war. Nothing had gone according to plan. Konoha was supposed to have been considerably weaker without the Sandaime, two Umbu squads, and a number of Jounin who had been visiting a small village on the borders of the Fire and Wind countries. The entire village had been a trap. His trap. Officially, the people of the Waft village wanted to form an alliance with the Fire country and collaborate with Leaf. Unofficially, Uchiha Madara made sure that there were intrigues and traitors among the ranks of the ninja of the Waft village, just enough to ensure that the Sandaime had his work cut out for him for at least 5 days before the assault began. In addition to that, he had prepared the assault on the Leaf village as well, in order to cripple Konoha just a little bit more. But his plan had gone utterly pear-shaped. Konoha had fought with everything it had and had come out victorious against the beast. Moreover, the Yondaime had evidently discovered a way to seal or destroy the Kyuubi and live to speak of it. The outcome frustrated Madara to no end. He found it hard to believe that once again his plans had failed, especially because of the fact that he was considerably older and more experienced than the fresh-faced brat Namikaze. And now he was forced to consider what he would do if the fox really had been destroyed. He would have to investigate and find out how Kyuubi was defeated as soon as possible. But before he did that, he required rest. Summoning and controlling the beast had required an extortionate amount of chakra. And when he saw from afar how the fox had, apparently, dwindled into nothing, he'd had to retreat. And now he was left drained and aggravated. But he wasn't finished yet. He still had to find out if the Sandaime had been successfully killed. He decided to use the last of his chakra reserves to travel through space to meet with his aide. He appeared in the assigned area on the outskirts of the Waft village and waited. The man was meant to have lead a group of Jounin and retired Umbu who'd agreed to join in the assault. They believed that without the Sandaime and some of Konoha's better-known shinobi, their small village would gain greater political ground and would become more successful. Everyone knew that Leaf was probably the most powerful village at the moment, but it also meant that smaller villages like Waft were up against some tough competition. He observed the village and noted that a great deal of damage had been done, probably almost as much as in Konoha. He checked his watch and huffed in annoyance at his aide's tardiness as a frown made its way onto his face. He gazed dispassionately at the bodies that greeted his sight and discovered that the bloody scene lifted his mood a little. But he was still annoyed at his failure in Leaf. Bored of waiting, he decided to travel to the area where the main fight was meant to have taken place, and was livid to see that only a few Konoha shinobi could be found dead. His outrage grew when he spotted the corpse of his supporter pierced with knives. The dead man's eyes were still open, his mouth agape in frozen shock, and half of his body was burnt by a fire jutsu. It appeared that this part of his plan had been a failure too. He didn't know if he should just brush it off or throw a temper tantrum. It was evident that the Sandaime had survived, maybe not unscathed, but had survived nonetheless. The attack should have worked for the best of this village, given its shinobi fame, feasibility, and a future. But it had utterly backfired, and Madara wouldn't have been surprised if this fiasco were to escalate into a civil war. And the thought was beautiful. He might not have had his revenge on Leaf yet, but he would continue trying. And what better way to unsettle the superpower nation than to surround it with the threat of war itself? He examined the battlefield, and it brought a smile back onto his face. The ruins of a once progressing village and the blood of its people surrounded him, and he walked through the center of it all, reveling in the solitude, certain that he wouldn't encounter a single soul. But he was mistaken. A distant crying piqued his curiosity. Who could have survived and stayed behind in this place? Following the sound to find the source, he came upon a relatively intact house. The flames had mostly died down here, and only one wall had been smashed down. Amongst the ash and debris by the road was a small, white bundle. It was a baby. Madara tilted his head to one side, surprised that an infant would have been so carelessly left behind. Or maybe, in the panic of the attack, it had simply been overlooked. Or more likely still, the family was dead. The child gradually stopped crying, having sensed by primal instinct that another person was nearby. It was a man clad entirely in black. His long hair matched the dark tone of his clothes, but the most noticeable feature about him were his eyes, deep, crimson, and intimidating. The man picked the child up and inspected it closely. It was male and uninjured, but Madara was puzzled. The child didn't look native to this region. His bright blonde hair and almost purple eyes were testament to that fact. And there was something odd about the little one's eyes. Upon closer inspection, he could see that there was something within them. He couldn't make out what it was exactly, but he knew there was an array of dots or symbols in a spiral shape that intrigued him. The newborn blinked and observed the man without a single trace of alarm, which was amusing. "You're an interesting one," he mused. The boy blinked again. "Dash, what shall I do with you, I wonder? I find you here alone amid the ashes, like a sign that where there is an end, there will always be a new beginning." The child smiled at him in that adorable way that only babies can, and he couldn't help but smile himself. He might have said that he felt blessed if he were the type of person to believe in blessings. He could bet that this boy possessed a bloodline, one he himself has never seen before, so it would be a waste to leave him here. And Madara never wasted anything but time. "I guess I'll have to take you with me for now. Any shirushi?" Shirushi. Sign, omen, seal, symbol, or mark. Chapter 1. Parentage. When they reached Konoha, it was already late afternoon. They were glad that their journey was finally over, but their relief was short-lived. The sight they were greeted by was of a wrecked village. When the Sandaime laid his eyes upon the sight, he couldn't help but think that someone had spent an extraordinary amount of time and effort to plan out the attacks. It was clear enough that the scuffle in the Waft village and the fight that had taken place here were connected. He had been suspicious of all the S-rank missions that the Konoha shinobi had been commissioned to complete over the last 2 months. Never before had he witnessed so many high-level requests coming in. But then he'd thought to himself that Leaf was widely considered to be the strongest village. So it was only logical that people trusted the shinobi of Konoha more. He became worried when 8 of the best Umbu in Konoha's ranks died. Still, he had brushed it off thinking that it wasn't first time that talented ninja died while on a dangerous mission. And then a missive came from the Waff village on the border of the Fire Country, and no one had considered it suspicious that Waft had suddenly wanted to start working with Leaf. No, they had thought that it would be a good opportunity to strengthen Konoha's ranks with a naturally wind-affiliated people of Waft. After all, the village was very close to the Wind Country, and many of its ninja used wind techniques. But who would have known that behind the civil and pacifist facade lay the imminent threat of battle, civil war, and betrayal. When the WAF shinobi had started quarreling amongst themselves, the Leaf Ninja hadn't wanted to interfere, but that mindset had changed entirely when Hiruzen Sarutobi was assaulted. They had, of course, attempted to settle the matter diplomatically, but their efforts were in vain. The spat continued, and some of the Waft shinobi declared that they were even prepared to engage the former Hokage in battle. And when they did, it became evident that they had received tip-offs on his preferred techniques and battle strategies. In the end, the controlled battle escalated into a wild and vicious slaughter fest, which razed the village to the ground. Seeing the state Konoha was in, Sarutobi feared the worst. The first shinobi they encountered was a chunin who was guarding the now non-existent gates. He looked immensely comforted to see the former leader of the village and his fellow ninja again, but his relief was short-lived when he told the latecomers of what had happened. Konoha had come under attack 2 days ago, but not by enemy ninja though. Rather, it was the doing of the strongest of the tailed beasts. The Yondaime Hokage had successfully subjugated the beast, but hadn't been himself since then. Having heard this, Sarutobi wasted no time in running to the tower that had, miraculously, remained untouched. He wondered what could possibly have happened to change the Yondaime so much after defeating the monster. Quite simply, he didn't know. And he didn't find out even after he hastily entered the Hokage's office. All he knew was that Minato looked like he carried the weight of the world upon his shoulders. And it was a weight he could not lift, therefore he broke beneath it. The Yondaime Hokage had been the most promising chunin before the war with IWA started, and he was a prodigy even among all the other promising shinobi. As a jounin, he was reliable and unstoppable, and his beliefs and ninja ways were an inspiration to many. Even at his young age, he deserved the title of the strongest, and Sarutobi had never once regretted bestowing that title onto him. Not once. Not until today. The young blonde man looked like he had aged 10 years. Looking around, Sarutobi saw that the office was a royal mess. The floor and desk had been conquered by a multitude of scrolls, books, and seals, and one shelf by the wall was broken and its contents scattered across the office. The young man himself was sitting at the table, his upper body slumped on it as his lifeless eyes stared ahead. It seemed as if he did not perceive the world around him. The dark shadows beneath his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in quite a while, and it looked as though he hadn't changed out of his clothes since the fight, if the rumpled and dirty standard jounin uniform and white cloak were any indication. But it appeared he didn't care. His head was on the desk, on top of an unrolled scroll with seals written all over it as he stared at the opposite wall. The Sandaime had been warned that the Hokage was unwilling to let anyone see him. Not even the medics worried about his well-being. It was the first time Hiruzen had ever seen his successor like this, and it begged the question, what on earth had really happened to make such a mess of a man as competent as Minato? Obviously, he had fought and destroyed the demon, or sealed it for that matter. So why did he look as if he'd suffered a crippling defeat? A frown marred his already lined forehead as he wondered about the situation. The old man took gentle steps further into the office and stopped opposite from Minato by the desk. Willing his voice to sound as soft as possible, he spoke. Minato-kun, what happened? The man did not react, and Saratobi couldn't help but think that he was like a dead man, unmoving and unaware. Saratobi's frown deepened. He glanced down at the notes, papers, and scrolls strewn around, trying to find a hint at what might have taken place during the battle. He did not recognize most of what he saw and had a sneaking suspicion that Minato had probably made most of them up himself. Some of the ones that he did recognize, though, could have been derived, he realized with a chill, from an assortment of different Fuin jutsu and Kenjutsu. These jutsus looked highly similar to what was used for the creation of Jinchuriki. He didn't like where this development was leading. Minato, you need to get your act together. He continued in a gentle tone. If not for Konoha, then at least for your family. If you don't show that you're able to lead the village during this difficult period, what will people begin to think? They may think whatever they want. The man whispered. Saratobi glanced at him, still not understanding. He still couldn't fathom the reason why Minato acted as though the world had ended. He desperately wanted to ask him what happened, but that would be tactless in this situation, he thought, and anyway he heard the door open, so he stayed quiet. Soundlessly, the student of Minato walked in. Kakashi looked at his sensei with a pain-filled gaze, before sighing and motioning for Saratobi to come with him. The old man nodded with a frown and complied. They walked out of the office and stopped in the corridor, where a few people lingered, unsure of what to do. Saratobi could guess that order in the tower had not yet been restored. Sandaime-sama, I am afraid there isn't much we can do to help Minato-sensei get through this. Hatake Kakashi sounded hopeless, and Hiruzen narrowed his eyes at his statement. He didn't wear his mantle anymore, but he was still sharp enough to spot the telltale signs of a great but hidden pain in Kakashi's tone. Get through what? He prompted, impatient to find out what on earth had happened. The single black eye of the Jounin narrowed in desolation, and he gulped and then looked down to the floor. So you haven't heard. He took a deep breath and spoke quietly. Keikushina-san is dead. The former Hokage almost felt his heart stop at this revelation. Suddenly the dead look on Minato's face made perfect sense. It no longer seemed surprising that the young man was listless and just about ready to die himself. She went into early labor shortly after the QB attacked. I don't know the specific details, but something went wrong and the doctors couldn't save her. The Jounin informed him. The old man sighed solemnly. What about the child? He queried, an ominous feeling settling in his stomach. Kakashi looked away, in shame or in sorrow. Hiruzen couldn't tell. We don't know. Saratobi stared at him, the question clear on his face. Kakashi elaborated with reluctance. Truth is, we simply don't know where the child is. As far as we're concerned, it's vanished in a thin air. But I'm willing to bet that Minato-sensei knows more about the child's disappearance than he's letting on. Saratobi sighed and looked back in the direction of the office. This was going to be tough. Wrenching young men out of grief-stricken stupors could easily be classified as an A-rank mission, Saratobi thought to himself. He was certainly going to have his work cut out for him. Katie. The work in the civilian hospital in Kirigakure was quiet. Ninja did not seek healers in this place, knowing that the best medics they could find would be working in a specialized shinobi hospital, where the medics offered first-rate healing jutsus and special techniques that guaranteed fast and reliable results. Consequently, the medics in the public hospital saw few gravely wounded patients. The doctors here were unspecialized for the most part, since they rarely required the skills necessary to remove poisons or replenish those who suffer from chakra exhaustion, or perform transplants, or heal severe injuries caused by whatever mess these shinobi got themselves into. The nurses at this establishment were usually always smiling and very infrequently had a hurry to aid dying patients. In this peaceful little hospital, there was no such thing as a war victim or tough training drills, and they lived in an illusion of relative peace. None of the staff at this pleasant place of healing were capable of detecting a jinjutsu, let alone break it. And that was why no one noticed the minor jinjutsu that kept Madara hidden from their sight as he walked through the corridors scouting out for a suitable candidate. Madara had spent a good deal of time considering who to employ to look after the infant, having come to the conclusion that he was entirely unsuited for the job. He possessed neither the time, the skills, nor the patience to raise and look after a baby. He was a battle-hardened man, a lethal shinobi, and ruthless manipulator. He was not, however, a childminder. Raising children was not something he was trained to do, and it surely wasn't something he ever planned on doing. The logical answer to this dilemma was simply to find someone who would do the job for him. But his name and status, as well as various other factors, complicated this idea. To the world, he was officially dead. He was a man hated and feared by many, and he couldn't simply hire any old babysitter for the boy, because the child was unique, and anyone working with him might begin asking too many questions. Additionally, if anyone knew that it was his baby, it would immediately end up drawing unnecessary attention, not to mention put it in unnecessary danger. So the person he was going to pick would have to conform to a certain criteria. It couldn't just be anyone. It had to be a lonely individual without any family that would search for them if he or she disappeared. It couldn't be a shinobi because he wanted to direct the child down a particular shinobi way, and it couldn't be someone too cowardly who would want to run away and tell the whole world what he or she had seen. This someone had to be weak both physically and psychologically, so that they couldn't harm the child or themselves, and so that he could keep them under his thumbs easily enough. Nor could it be anyone too old, experienced, or clever for the job. But it shouldn't be someone too young, too unqualified, or stupid either. It had to be someone with a kind heart and could go about his or her daily life with plenty of common sense and didn't have much to lose by raising a child. With all this in mind, he walked, unnoticed, to the pediatric wing. Say ah. The woman peered at the tongue and walls of the girl's mouth and nodded with a smile. The child laughed with sparkling eyes when the woman started touching and pressing her neck, stomach, and then the girl's spine before pulling out a stethoscope. The girl's mother was standing nearby, waiting to hear the pediatrician's verdict. "Does it hurt if I press here like this?" she asked kindly. The girl shook her head. "How about here?" The girl shook her head again. The woman smiled. "Okay, then you can put your dress back on." The doctor flicked through the files on her desk, while the mother of the girl helped her pull the dress straight. "I always wished that I'd had children of my own, you know. Your girl is so sweet. And also you have nothing to worry about. She's perfectly healthy. But I recommend that you cut down on the dairy products, especially in the mornings. A single glass should suffice, and that would solve the problem, I think. Make sure she drinks plenty of water as well." "Ah, Thank you, Aiko-san. Come see me in another month or so, and we'll monitor the progress. The woman finished with a smile. Of course. Thank you again. The mother said as her daughter waved back at the pediatrician before stepping out of sight, leaving the woman alone. The nurse outside the office directed the clients to the exit, and silence descended in the woman's office. She looked out the window and considered the state of her life. She had been in the business of diagnosing and treating children for 15 years now, but had never successfully started her own family. She was so busy with her job that when it came to her own life, she thought gloomily that she was alone. It didn't help that she had never met a man to fall in love with. She leaned her head on her hand and observed the street below. Her brown eyes expressed her longing for a family as they tracked the progress of the mother and daughter she had just seen. She knew there were many other women around in the same situation as her. With the last Shinobi War and the Civil War that currently reigned in mist, you could consider yourself extremely lucky if you had the opportunity to settle down. And Tom wasn't waiting for her to get her act together. She was in her 30s. She reminded herself, pushing a lock of black hair behind her ear. Sometimes she thought about traveling far away from here. The thought wasn't such a surprising one, since many people saw that other countries possessed a far greater degree of stability and peace than the water country did. When the rumors about an upcoming revolution reached civilian populace, she didn't believe in it, especially when she heard others say that it was a bloodline purge. In her mind, from a medical point of view, there was minimal difference between normal men, shinobi, and bloodline wielders. So what if the latter possessed some special ability other shinobi did not? Surely it didn't make them any stronger, weaker, better, or worse than other people. It was shocking how some people treated those that were in any way different. Was it fear? Were they alarmed that those gifted people would in some way hurt them or their families? Or perhaps it was envy. After witnessing these changes in Mist, she had promised herself that she would someday run away and settle down somewhere where the shinobi world could not reach her, and leave this place in her past and her memories. Only she couldn't. If she left, who would help these innocent children? Who would listen to their suffering parents and ease their minds? If she left, whom would they turn to when their children fell ill? Shinobi medics? No, they did not treat civilians. And if they did, it was only for an astronomical price. If she left, she would feel as though she had betrayed them, because she had promised to help. It hurt her that she denied herself her own peace and happiness, but she would never forgive herself if her absence were the cause for someone else's pain. A young probationer walked in after knocking softly on the office door and placed the short list of patients the pediatrician would see tomorrow on her desk. She stood up to prepare their files and remind herself about their state. She couldn't understand why, but as she crossed the room to the cabinet, the world around her turned black. Kanahagakure. Hiruzen spoke with Kakashi about the details of the night of the attack. Besides the fact that the fox had nearly destroyed half of the village, the Yondaime had summoned Gamabunta and used some special technique. Kakashi couldn't tell Hiruzen any more than that. It meant that he was going to have to speak with the boss toad himself. And for that, he needed Jiraiya, who could summon him. Either that, or Minato could come back to his senses and explain everything that had happened himself. But Hiruzen didn't see that happening anytime soon. He was absolutely sure that the fox attack and the happenings in the WAF village were connected. The Sandaime was old and had witnessed all three shinobi wars, but he was still in his right mind, and his instincts told him that there is no such thing as coincidence. When he visited the half-destroyed hospital, he found out that Kushina had died giving birth to a boy, and her last moments had been filled with grief at the knowledge that her husband planned on sealing the monster in their child. She had no time to give her child any last words before she died, and this knowledge only added to the pain that Minato was in. The doctors and midwives who had been there with her that fateful night claimed that Minato took the child himself. He left to join his shinobi in the fight with the newborn in his arms, but not once did he mention how he planned to fight the beast. Though the fact that he took Naruto with him was an answer in and of itself. Still, there remained the question of where the boy was, and none of the witnesses on the battlefield could provide an answer to it. One member of the Hyuga clan, a branch member, mentioned that he saw their leader with the child when he summoned Gamabunta, but after that all traces of the boy vanished. Could it be that the sealing process had gone wrong? Or that Minato had created a new technique that required a sacrifice even greater than the one for creating a living prison? No, Minato would never do something like that. He could and would create a Jinchuriki if he had to, but he would never kill the boy, especially not his son, just to defeat the beast. But if he had indeed imprisoned the demon in the body of the infant, then where was the child? And why did Minato have it with him after the battle ended? He behaved as if he had lost his child. Hiruzen squeezed his eyes shut and exhaled tiredly. He gathered strength in his old bones and walked to find the shinobi working in the message department. He needed to inform Jiraiya of what had happened and ask him to return to Konoha as quickly as possible. Minato needed him. After all, Jiraiya was his father figure, and maybe, just maybe, the young man would finally get his act together. Somewhere in water country. When she awoke, she found herself in a room she had never seen before. She touched her forehead as the slight headache reminded her that she had lost consciousness in the middle of the day. It remained a mystery as to why. The room she was in contained a simple bed, shelves for clothes and a few other items, a nightstand, and a large window. She was still in her own clothes, so it meant she hadn't been touched, but she found strange marks on her wrists. It troubled her, and she began to get scared as she wondered where she was and who had brought her here. She certainly wasn't in the hospital anymore. If she had merely fainted, she would still be there, but it seemed fairly clear to her now that she had been kidnapped. The question was why? As she deliberated all the possible reasons, the door to the room opened and a tall, lean man entered. He had the look of a shinobi about him. He was dressed like one too, and she was sure that he had hidden weapons on him. His face was serious and did not betray what he might have been thinking. She noticed that his skin was pale and his features sharp, and that he had spiky black hair, but the most prominent thing about him were his eyes. The moment she saw them, she knew that he possessed a bloodline. "I've brought you here because I have a job for you," he said. She almost flinched but controlled herself. She sensed that beneath his mild tone lay a dangerous force not to be trifled with. He did not look like a maniac, but she could feel that, without a doubt, if he had wanted to kill her, she'd be dead in no time. What could he possibly want from a weak and lonely woman like her? She wasn't shinobi medic, so she didn't even know of their healing arts. She didn't have any information that would be useful to shinobi, nor did she have any connections with anyone important. She herself did not have anything he could possibly be interested in. "Who are you?" she asked, daring to pose the first question. "I am the one who has your life in his hands. You will do as I ask you to do. You will not disobey me or try to act rashly. As long as you remain obedient, you will remain alive." The first sentence the mysterious said almost broke her heart. That man had just taken away her life. He had robbed her of her freedom and free will. Choices were no longer hers to make according to this man. And worst of all, she thought with a hint of hysteria, he would probably kill her when she was done with what he'd wanted from her. She didn't look like a prisoner, but she already felt like one. And the worst thing was she knew that she had no say in the matter. If she went against his wishes, he would simply kill her and find someone else to do what he wanted to be done. At least she assumed that that was what he would do. And then some other person would be burdened with this terrible situation. She couldn't let him use someone else. What if he kidnapped some unlucky girl to do? Actually, she didn't even know what he wanted her to do. She was simply jumping to conclusions in her panic. Seeing that she was lost in thought, he spoke to get her attention. "Aiko-san, my name is Madara. I need your services, so please stop looking so devastated before you've even heard what I want you to do. Come with me." He walked out, and after a slight hesitation, she followed him. She saw a flight of stairs leading downwards, which meant that they were in a house at least 2 stories high. Looking around, she noticed that it looked empty and clean, meaning that whomever it belonged to rarely lived here. He led her into a room that could have been a living room. He gestured to a corner or the room. She followed the direction of the indication and saw, to her immense astonishment, a crib. Her eyes widened upon seeing it. The man, Madara, he had said his name was, stopped by it, and she saw his hand reach down. She walked closer and saw him stroke a baby's soft fuzz hair. The tiny child was sleeping peacefully, and she wondered if it was his. The baby had bright yellow hair and unblemished skin, and it was covered by a blue blanket. "I neither have time nor the skill to look after a baby, so I want you to take care of the boy to the best of your abilities." She was more than a little surprised. Here she thought that he was going to kill her after using her in some humiliating way, when in reality, he wanted her to do what she did the best, looking after children. But why go so far to get her here? Or why her for that matter? Was the child ill? Or maybe this man was too well known to be seen with a baby or seen in the hospital. We're in a secluded region, considerably far away from Mist. You can't leave this place. You will have noticed the seals I placed on your wrists. I trust they will prevent you from going any farther than 200 meters from this house. Everything you might need you will find here. I will visit once in a month to see the boy and bring fresh supplies. Do you understand, Aiko-san? She swallowed. He didn't just mean taking care of the child as in healing him, but he meant that she was to raise the boy, teach him to walk, to speak, to write. She was going to be staying here for months, years even. It was as if it was some twisted version of her dreams and desires had become a reality. She had been taken far, far away from the prospect of war, and brought to a secluded house with an infant that couldn't have been any older than few days, and she was going to rear that child. How could you say no? She didn't have a choice, of course, but thinking over it, the situation wasn't nearly as bad as it seemed. It looked like this man was lonely or didn't really have anyone he could trust with this child. So much so that he had to kidnap a woman and force her to take care of his child in his stead. Was it his? It had to be, even if the child didn't remotely resemble him. Perhaps he took after his mother, if he went so far as to give into the care of another woman. She felt sad for him. She looked up Madara and suppressed a gasp at the emotion she saw in his eyes. She almost felt that he could force her heart to stop with the intensity of his gaze, full of superiority, knowledge, and power. She was closer now, so she could see how unique and frightening his eyes were. He was so silent and calm that she felt humbled and insignificant in his presence. Why, yes, Madara-sama, she whispered in response to his instructions. Good, he nodded. Do you have any questions? She blinked and quickly thought of anything important she had yet to learn. She looked down at the child and realized that there was indeed one important detail she did not know yet. What is the boy's name? Shirushi. He answered. She smiled at the meaningful name. When he saw the look in the woman's eyes at the sight of the baby, he knew that he made the right choice. She had love for children, had the heart for it and the patience. Her small frame and warm appearance made her the perfect person for this job. And just as he thought, even though she was scared, she was not stupid enough to refuse or think of running away. He checked her files in the hospital, and to his pleasure, she had no family, no relatives. She had younger sister, but fortunately, she died in the last war. She used to work in a different civilian hospital and missed 3 years ago, but had received a promotion and been transferred. It was perfect. Her colleagues could not get close enough with her in that short time to be too worried about her disappearance. He had nothing to worry about. The house he placed them in was his own private property. The whole island was, to be precise, but she didn't need to know about that. He relaxed and landed on the other side of his space traveling technique before entering an office with lights on. Walking over to the window, he saw that it was raining heavily and a gray-blue light filtered in through the glass. Turning around, he saw the documents and scrolls he had asked for on his desk and now had to look at. Madara picked the top one up and began to read in silence, standing with his back to the window. The door opened, and in walked a woman clad in black shinobi clothing. The only other color on her were from the white arm bracers and white bandages around her calves. Her black hair was coiled in a tight bun pierced with needles. In her hands, she held another stack of papers. When she saw him, she paused in the doorframe and studied his appearance. The young leader was dry, meaning he hadn't been outside, yet he was wearing a black traveling cloak. Her gaze quickly flicked to the white cloak draped over the back of the chair and the hat on the desk. She looked up and spoke. "You're back, Mizuki-sama." Chapter 2, Revelations. The Hokage library was vast. To call it anything less than that would be to insult the endless number of books that had gathered and found their way into this quiet domain over nearly an entire century. The shelves and cabinets twisted and folded in an almost labyrinthine manner, leaving only a central circle clear. This was the library's workspace. To be in this circle was to be at the heart of an incomprehensible magic. Silent and profound was this place, surrounded by an endless wealth of knowledge that had come from all corners of the world and from every culture imaginable. So many were the books gathered here that no man could read them all in a single lifetime, and at the center of them all was a round table. It was situated right in the middle of the workplace, big enough to accommodate as many as 10 people, and because it was in the center of the library, it was easy to navigate back to. When Jiraiya reached this place, he found a big drawn version of the hack No Fuin Shiki combined with the Shiki Fujin. It was an 8 trigram style seal, where 4 symbol seals had been separated. To put it simply, this seal was capable of filtering a demon's chakra and adding it to a person's natural reserves. He studied the meticulously drawn seal for a minute before he turned his attention to the contract that could summon a Shinigami. The Yondaime was right. Logically, the only price one could pay for summoning a death god was a life in return. But if that was the case, why then hadn't Minato lost his life? What had gone differently from the theorized outcome? Were death gods perhaps not quite the way humans thought they were? Did they desire things other than the life of the summoner in return for their services? What exactly was it that they wanted in return? It was impossible to say. After all, it wasn't every day that someone summoned a god. Therefore, information on this topic was exceedingly scarce. Of course, Jiraiya shouldn't have been surprised. After all, how were humans to know what went through the mind of a god, or that of a demon, angel, or any other spirit that surely dwelt in this world somewhere? The white-haired man scratched his left brow in confusion. What had Minato been thinking when he had signed the deal with the Shinigami? Couldn't he have used some standard demon sealing method instead? Why did he insist on doing everything in his own heroic, sacrificial way? For all the brains the boy had been blessed with, he could be an astonishingly stupid brat. Jiraiya was just thankful that Minato hadn't fought against the help of the medics. It had taken a while, but at last he had managed to convince the blonde that his child was probably still alive and the world hadn't ended. Jiraiya suspected that if he hadn't, the man might have committed suicide. He had truly loved that woman and the child for what little time he had known him. Though, despite the fact that he had been able to convince Minato that Naruto was still alive, he wasn't so sure of it himself. The only clue he had was a single detail about parentage. The Shinigami had not said that the child would die, but neither did he say that it would live. Regardless, Jiraiya had explained it to Minato in such a way that made the Shinigami's words sound like this parentage had been transferred to someone else now, and thanks to this little line, Minato was once again ready to face the world and start searching for his baby. There was one other aspect of the Shinigami's words that Jiraiya found deeply disturbing. He had mentioned that Minato was not the only one to be punished for his actions. There was this so-called initiator of the attack that was to receive this punishment too. The question was, who was this person and what reason did they have for their show of aggression? From what Sarutobi had revealed in his musings, it was most likely the same person that was behind the civil war in Waft and the deaths of the few strong Konoha Umbu. Sarutobi also, apparently, believed that the attack must have been planned months in advance. Jiraiya looked back to Minato. The poor boy. He was so young, yet already so broken. He remembered how the blond man had cried in his arms when he finally found it in himself to let go and express his grief. Perhaps that was why the Shinigami hadn't taken his life, because it would just be too easy to die. So Minato was given the hard way to live, without his child and wife. The god of death would surely not burden himself with a human child, So that meant one of two things had happened to the child. Either he had killed it to make sure that Minato would never stand a chance to see his child again, or he abandoned it into the care of someone else, some other human. If this was the case, they would have to look for a boy with blonde hair and blue eyes. There couldn't possibly be that many people with features as striking as Minato's. But something told the aging man that they weren't going to find a child, no matter how hard they tried. They were, after all, dealing with the Shinigami himself. There is nothing a god does that need make sense to humans. Hush, hush, she almost sang in an attempt to calm the boy down. She shook the small bottle with warm milk and pressed the teat to his lips. Come on, my child, she whispered and smiled triumphantly when the boy finally latched onto the teat. She was walking through the kitchen, lightly swaying the child back and forth in her arms. Aiko had noted that baby was surprisingly calm for the most part. He slept solidly and peacefully, ate everything Aiko gave him without fuss, and cried only when he was hungry or decided he wasn't receiving enough attention. Usually babies also cried when they encountered something they didn't like or understand. But Shirushi was impossibly curious and rarely got freaked by anything he stumbled upon. But Aiko had quickly come to understand that the infant in her care was destined to be very different from any other child she'd met. The first noticeable sign that alerted her to this fact were his eyes. Their purple sheen was simply unnatural. She had thought that this was at least one thing he had in common with his father: unusual eyes. I wonder, do you maybe look more like your mother? She might have been a ninja too, she mused. Aiko didn't know anything about the boy's parents' history. All she knew, for now, was that Shirushi didn't have a mother to look after him, and that his father wasn't willing to devote his time to children. It troubled her that Madara-sama would neglect his son like this, and fretted over the fact that he might come to see him as an object to be used. Maybe his heart had been broken by the death of his beloved, and in order to protect his fragile mentality, he became harsh and cold. She had met plenty of people who tried to build a wall around their broken hearts, and knew that they all wound up just hurting themselves in the end. If the same was happening with the boy's father, she wasn't sure if she could fix it if he only ever appeared every once in a while. His work as a shinobi also contributed to this, because while he was becoming cruel and cold, there was no one to distract him from the cruelty of life that shinobi witnessed so often. And killing people tended to become easier when one did not possess emotions. And so Aiko decided that she simply had to try and raise the boy in the right way, protecting his innocence. Your daddy is so lonely. He must feel crushed every time he looks at you. She walked to the window and looked out. The house was surrounded by a grassy meadow, and further away was the forest line. In her explorations of the mansion, Aiko had found a lovely pond behind the building, and a bathhouse to boot. It was like a dream come true to have such a luxurious facility at her disposal. She glanced up at the sky. It was a sunny day, and she almost felt like she had been reborn. She wondered if this was because she had been given a new purpose in life. The boy yawned toothlessly, and then began to observe her with a keenness that was unnatural for one so young, and yet he did it so innocently that she couldn't help but smile. It's a good thing that you have me, Shirushi. Your father will do anything to take his mind off all those painful memories. So he will be working hard, trying to forget about your mother, and as sad as it is, he'll be forgetting about you too. But we won't let him do that, right? She headed up the stairs to bring the infant to his room as he yawned again. The boy was ready to take his afternoon nap. On the day of her arrival, Aiko had discovered that the house was far bigger than she had at first anticipated. The top floor alone had 6 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, while the first floor boasted a kitchen, a dining room, a drawing room, and a study, the sizes of which bordered on the silly. On the ground floor, she had found a library and even a dojo, which was connected to a room containing an assortment of shinobi equipment. This room she kept locked for the safety of the insatiable and nosy boy. All in all, the living conditions of this place were more than just a little impressive, so it surprised her when she learned that the lord of the house rarely lived here. He must have been on the move a lot, and his work forced him to spend most of his time away from here. But that was a given, though. He was a ninja after all. But Aiko maintained the opinion that it would be for the best if he could find more time to spend with his son. If only Madara-sama would remember that this child would eventually need a father figure. She smiled unknowingly, thinking that all men wanted to settle down and start a family sooner or later, and all men, no matter how hard they tried to deny it, loved children, especially their own. Madara-sama simply needed time, she thought, as she laid the sleeping boy gently in his crib. His footsteps were heavy as he made his way to the opening that led outside where the sun was presently shining brightly. He was in no particular hurry, but there was one very important thing he still had on his to-do list. He walked along the decoration of the building, which appeared to be a tongue, high above the ground, above the city, above humankind. He was closer to the sky than the earth, the sky that could hear him, his thoughts, his intents. Today was the day. 2 years ago, he had taken an enormous step closer to his own dream. 2 years ago, he had also taken a step closer to his dream too. I hate this pathetic village with its never-ending rain. I will make it stop one day, so that this village, this little child will stop crying. I will become the god of this world and cease its endless conflict. He had become a god in his people's eyes, a god in his own eyes. He could finally control the skies. But today he could not let the sun shine brightly on this settlement as it wanted to. Today this place had to weep. He raised his arms and looked up. His eyes did not reflect the clouds in the sky. His face was not that of a deity. The face appeared sad, calm, knowing and tranquil, but it was also horrifically pierced with a multitude of black objects. Strands of his spiked orange hair shifted in the wind as, rapidly, everything around him darkened, and the previously bright sky was abruptly overshadowed by dark clouds. Soon the first raindrops began their descent to the earth. Below, infinitesimal people stopped what they were doing and observed the rain. To them, it was a sign that their god was in mourning. His pain was almost tangible to them, so they stopped smiling and laughing and became quiet. If their god had a reason to be sad that day, then that meant they had a reason too. If their god couldn't find happiness, then how could they? He let the water soak through his clothes and to his skin. It made him feel right. This very day, a few years ago, his friend, the person most important to him, died. He had taken it upon himself to continue fighting for his friend's dreams, and he was prepared to sacrifice just about everything for it, even himself. He felt the presence of another person behind his back. But he didn't need to turn around and know it was her. She was one of the reasons as to why their friend had died, but she was also one of the reasons why he was still alive. Yahiko had loved her. That was why he had given up his life for her. He himself needed her and cared for her. That was why he let her stay, even though being with him would put her in an immeasurable amount of danger. But she was stronger now. She could take care of herself. Every year, on the day that Yahiko died, she refused to speak. Today was no different. She would not utter a word for the rest of the day. It was as if she had made a vow to herself, and maybe she had. When she looked at him, she tried to hide what she felt. And he knew what she felt, because he almost felt the same when he looked at himself. She didn't step into the rain. She stayed beneath the shelter, not joining him in his grief. It wasn't vanity or discomfort that compelled her to remain out of the deluge, nothing so trite. She blamed herself, and she wouldn't allow the rain to wash away her guilt and pain lest she forget what caused it. She didn't deserve the purifying touch of the rain. They were so different and yet so alike. They had grown so strong in these past years, and they hadn't abandoned their friend's dream either. Their friend was still with them, and they were determined to show him what they could achieve with their powers. It was all about revenge. Everything in this world is done out of love. Love made people do stupid, beautiful, and horrifying things. Things like revenge. There was no man out there closer to him than he had been to his own brother. He was the only one who understood him, was equal to him, and shared his views with him. They had been unbeatable. So why was it that he was standing here alone? It was so very long ago. He had lost his sight. He had been so powerless that he hadn't even been able to walk around the compound without stumbling. In hindsight, he realized that he had relied on his eyes far too much, and that inevitably his sight had betrayed him. But he had his pride, that classic Uchiha pride, that wouldn't allow him to admit that he realized his life as a shinobi was over. He tried to learn to live without it, to fight and see and live without his eyes, but it was in vain. In the end, even his own clansmen treated him with pity, as if he was a dead man. He didn't let it show, though. He maintained his dignity, attended meetings, and giving his advice where it was needed. He refused to let anyone aid him when he blindly made his way through the maze of corridors that made up the Uchiha clan's compound. In the end, he chose to die by an enemy's hand. Meeting one's death in a fight was the greatest honor a warrior could receive. But apparently, it wasn't meant to be. When their clan received a mission they couldn't refuse, it was clear that his brother would never fulfill it adequately, even if he had the whole clan to back him. It was well known that in order to challenge one clan, you had to use another. The elders of the clan came to conclusion that it was Madara who was needed on the battlefield. But for him to be even remotely useful, he had to have ability to see. It was only later that he found out that Izuna had wanted to give him his eyes, that he couldn't bear to see his older brother struggling with the curse, and that the reason why he hadn't come to him to speak of it was that he had known that Madara would simply refuse. So when the elders ordered Izuna to give one eye to his older brother, he had obeyed implicitly. They were briefed on the mission together and planned every move. They gathered the strongest of their men and put their plans and strategies in motion. The fight on unnamed land lasted for hours, and in the end, it was they who were victorious. The clan they had been ordered to eliminate had possessed the ability to camouflage themselves in any and every terrain. Of course, no matter how good they were at blending in with their surroundings, nothing could help them hide from eyes that could see chakra. Having successfully completed the mission, Madara felt for, perhaps the first time in a long time, that he was experiencing a new beginning and that things might get better. But of course it was not to be. The remainder of the slaughtered clan and their allies wanted revenge for their defeat and came after the Uchiha clan and fought to avenge their fallen clansmen. The second battle was a gruesome and dreadful affair as the tired and weakened Uchiha clan were unable to raise their guard again in time. And it was then, during the second battle, that Madara watched his brother die. The one person that meant the world to him. Izuna had always placed others before himself. He had protected and loved his family unconditionally, and Madara had one day told him that if he did not think of his own well-being at some point, that he would eventually die thinking of others. Madara had been right, and Izuna died taking a blow that was meant for someone else. The few of them that remained after that battle were forced in a shameful retreat. That day he swore revenge. Revenge on the clans of the Water Country. But it had to wait while he was drawn into Shinobi clan wars, and then the creation of Shinobi Village. In a whirlwind of events, facing one betrayal after another, he eventually ceased believing in anything other than his own actions and abilities. Madara felt that anyone he trusted in would surely betray him and become his enemy at one point or another. Even those he worked with and employed were only under illusion that he cared. His last true friend had been Hashirama, and even he was his archenemy because he was of the Senju clan. Sometimes Madara got the impression that the whole world and all its inhabitants were out to get him, and he was stubbornly breaking down all their walls to achieve his victory. But after obtaining immortality, time became of little consequence to him, and he slowly, carefully took steps to bring his grand plans to fruition. And when he was officially proclaimed dead, it became even easier to move about undetected, go where he wanted to, do what he wanted to do. No one in their right minds would ever imagine that he still existed. His enemies would never be aware of him. He would hide behind someone else's face, someone's shadow, and yet be perfectly free to use their positions, their power, and control their actions. His revenge on Izuna's killers was always there in the back of his mind, waiting for the right moment to take its place at the front of his thoughts. And when it did, executing his long-planned revenge was a piece of cake. It had truly have been laughably easy to take the Mizuki's place, then to plant the idea for a bloodline purge and finally set the plan in motion. All he'd had to do was tell the ignorant people of Kiri that the bloodline wielders were demons in disguise and were always looking for an opportunity to kill them in their sleep. The idiots ate the lies like they were delectable morsels and all because he had seized the highest position of power. None of the shinobi questioned the change in their leader's behavior or actions. That was if they had even noted it. Yagura wasn't the sanest one around after all, and he'd had to bear the burden of the Sanbai. The logic of the people dictated that Yagura-sama would surely know better about demons than they, since he was, after all, the jailer of one. All of this also helped for him to realize the sheer power that the Bijou possessed, and if memory served correctly, All the bijou had been divided between shinobi villages in order to maintain a balance of power and, as a sign of peace, courtesy of Hashirama. Most of the villages, in the hopes of obtaining a powerful weapon, sealed beasts into humans. But Madara had a more ambitious plan for the bijou. He intended to recreate the 10-tailed beast from the nine that currently existed. If the historical records were correct, then the Sage of Six Paths himself had been the first Jinchuriki, but unable to fully destroy the 10-tailed beast's power, was forced to tear it into pieces. Madara felt giddy just thinking about the power that he would obtain if he successfully formed the 10 tails again. He held the child in his arms as Aiko placed all the supplies he had brought in their respective places. He wasn't in the least surprised to see her so full of energy, excitement, humor, and smiles anymore. In the beginning, it had been a bit uncomfortable to see her behaving so positively, but he learned to ignore such things. Her love for the boy made her happy, most likely. He looked down when he felt Shirushi touch his mask. It seemed he liked to study absolutely everything around him, and those eyes were always so full of curiosity, as if he was ready to discover everything there was to learn about the world. Madara sincerely hoped that those eyes were worth all the effort he was putting into the boy's growth. He was having to spend time, money, and a good portion of his thoughtfulness on the kid. He was no fool and knew that the bloodline the child seemed to possess shouldn't be necessary for his plans to come to fruition, but looked to be a powerful one, and Madara was never one to pass up a chance to obtain a bit more power. Using other people in one's plans and relying on them was one thing, but raising someone and teaching them to worship and protect you was entirely different. In the future, when this boy would see him as the most important figure in his life, he wouldn't even have to tell him to do what needed to be done. The boy would simply follow his every order, wish and demand without a thought of resistance. And if he influenced him in the right way, the kid might prove to be very useful. Besides, he would never dare to betray him, unlike so many others. He could pay for a shinobi to take an order from him, but nothing could quite compare to the devotion of a child to his or her parent figure. After all, parents are gods in the eyes of a child, and that was what he was counting on. But it would still be some time before the boy grew up. Fortunately for Madara, though, he wasn't in any hurry. He was an extremely patient person, and he had plenty of time on his hands. Mouth almost full. I think he will have all his teeth pretty early. It's proof that he's very healthy. He also repeats words a lot, so I'm sure he will learn to speak early too. He's probably going to be a very smart boy. The woman informed him happily, still busy with the task at hand. He's already repeating words? I thought children only started talking around the age of 2. He said, and blinked when the boy repeated words. The pronunciation hadn't been perfect by any means, but still came as a surprise. He found it almost equally surprising that the boy had detected the emphasis on that particular word. Unconsciously, his right hand caressed blonde locks, noting that they were very soft. Oh, it all depends on the child. There's no set rule for when or how children start to talk. Sooner or later, they just do. Madara grunted in reply. It pleased him that the child was already growing and progressing. It appeared he had inherited good genes. But he didn't plan on making too much contact with the boy, at least not until he could hold a decent conversation with him. Madara decided to hazard a guess that the boy came from a family of ninjas and that the ninjas in question possessed a Kekai Genkai of some form themselves. Perhaps they had been different bloodlines, and in combining had formed the one this boy had. Or perhaps the parents had both possessed the same bloodline, but theirs were recessive and had only come to show in their progeny. Very interesting indeed. Aiko fixed her dress after joining Madara and Shirushi in the drawing room. She stepped closer with a bright smile and slightly touched Madara's shoulder while looking down at the child. Otu-san, she pronounced slowly, expecting the boy to learn how to address his father. He didn't disappoint. Utitu-san, the boy tried. Madara was astonished to find that he felt very uncomfortable. He felt as if his responsibilities had multiplied all of a sudden, and he didn't like the increased weight of them. Not one bit. See, Madara-sama, he's a quick learner. Oh, by the way, I've prepared dinner. Will you join us? He shook his head and held out the baby to her. No, I won't. I don't have time. She nodded, shifting the boy in her arms so that they both felt comfortable. Have you written everything you need in the list? Yes, she replied, saddened by the brusque tone he had taken all of a sudden. Madara ignored her dejection. I'll be back in a month with the fresh supplies, he stated, and left in the vortex of smoke and fire. She sighed at the lack of progress in his feelings for the boy, but she reasoned that she had lots of time. There was no window, and no warmth either. Only cold stone walls and iron bars. He often leaned his head on them, staring at the wall opposite him, and no matter how he tried to look at it, he felt like a caged animal. No, he was a caged animal. His wrists, ankles, chest, and stomach were adorned by chakra suppression seals, but they really weren't much in comparison with his prison. It was literally decorated with them. They prevented him from being able to utilize his chakra for even the simplest of jutsu. Moreover, the seals made him incredibly weak, leached him of his strength, and he noticed that with each month he had less energy, slept longer, wasting away. And yet, despite that, he continued to dream up brilliant and fantastical escape plans. But they were all worthless. He was wasting his time. He was never getting out. He was condemned. It was as if he lived on a deserted island. Not once had he found proof that somewhere in the world outside his prison lived other people. He believed that his prison was underground, so he had no idea what was happening in the outside world. The small bit of space behind the bars led absolutely nowhere, as if this prison had no entrance and no exit. There was no sunlight. The only sources of light were a pair of grim torches that were stationed on the other side of the bars, well out of his reach. The young man with the short light hair sighed and shut his purple eyes as he contemplated his situation. In the beginning, he had been confused. He had awaited the day when his captors would use, torture, or kill him, or whatever else it was that Jinchuriki kidnappers did. But time had passed and nothing of that sort happened. It confused him to no end. What could his kidnappers possibly gain by keeping him imprisoned but alive? The only thing that came to mind was that it would lead to an absence of the village leader. But in essence, that made no sense, since the village would simply pick a new leader, and keeping him alive wasn't exactly a prerequisite for that. So why keep him alive at all? He wished that he could at least speak to his demon. But even that small ability had been taken from him by yet another set of unknown seals. He was powerless and nearing his wit's end. But he wouldn't stoop so low as to kill himself. even if he was sick and tired with the current state of things and his pathetic circumstances. The worst part was the silence. It was enough to drive anyone insane, though he suspected that he may have already crossed that line for some time now. The silence, along with the loneliness and hopelessness, were slowly turning him numb. He dejectedly sat on the futon and waited, because waiting was all that was left for him to do. He didn't know, or indeed no longer cared, how long he had been sitting motionlessly when a hideous figure emerged from the wall on the other side of the bars. He had long since gotten used to its strange appearance. With its green hair, yellow eyes, and two oppositely colored halves of its body, and its bizarre and ugly Venus flytrap. Yagura could not bring himself to believe that this thing was human, even if it did possess some human features. It was always the same. The thing would bring him some food, observe his appearance, maybe throw a comment or two, usually offending in its nature, and then leave. He was yet to learn what his name was and who was behind his incarceration. He had already considered that someone maybe planned to extract the demon from him. For what purpose he could not say, but perhaps his extended stay was a result of a lack of knowledge on how to extract the demon and seal it within something else. At any rate, this someone had better get to fulfilling those plans soon, because he was quickly getting tired of his unpleasant situation. The green-haired figure silently pushed the food through the bars. The wide black cloak it wore failed to disguise its unpleasant appearance. Yagura did not stand up. He continued to sit there and only briefly glanced at the food given to him. He barely even had the strength to feel annoyed anymore, even though he was being treated like a dog, with access to water in the corner of the room and the food on the floor. He let his tired glare land on the plant thing. "You appear to be in a bad mood today, Mizuki-sama." The thing spoke. It was mocking him, and he wished he could just squeeze the life out of it. A moment later, the air by the strange figure started to change and shift. It became a swirl and quickly took the shape of a man. The prisoner narrowed his eyes at the newcomer. For all the time he spent in this prison, Ugly Plant Man here had been the only living being to grace him with its presence. This was someone totally new to him. The newcomer's face was hidden in the shadowy of strands of his hair, so he couldn't determine what he looked like, but his red eyes were piercingly clear in the darkness as they observed him in a frighteningly calculating way. He felt a shiver go up his spine and wondered how it was that someone could cause him to feel such fear with only a single look. It had to be someone powerful, obviously. Perhaps this was the person responsible for his disappearance. Perhaps he was even his attacker. They stared at each other, thinking, observing, and judging. There was no doubt in Yagura's mind that this person knew who he was. He could only wish that he could say the same for the strangers in front of him. Upon closer inspection of the stranger, he came to the conclusion that he might be dealing with an Uchiha. The man was clearly using a dijitsu, and he could only think of one where the eyes turned red. While he studied the three-tailed demon's Jinchuriki, Madara noted that he had lost some weight and possibly the will to live. Even though Yagura glared at him with the eyes of an irritated and tired man, he could see depression behind it. For the most part, that was good. It meant he wasn't a threat and would not run away. Not that he could anyway. But there was always a possibility that if kept here for too long, he would snap and try to kill himself. That, of course, was a significant problem, since his death would kill the beast also. If it got to that stage, he would have to consider further restraints. He's unresponsive. The yellow-eyed creature spoke, commenting on the prisoner's behavior. But he's quiet, doesn't cause trouble, and seems to be fairly patient. I see, Madara murmured. That's good. Have you decided what you're going to do with him? Of course, but the plan has not progressed that far yet. The man mysteriously replied. The creature nodded its understanding. By the way, it suddenly said, I have a piece of news you might be interested in hearing. The strange thing tilted its head expectantly, and the white half smiled. The man looked at him from the corner of his eye. What news? I was able to confirm those rumors about the AIM village. It has a new leader. Madara nodded and returned to studying the Jinchuriki. It's strange, though, it added. The new leader never appears in public. Rather, he sends some sort of angel to inform the village of his plans and laws. The plant-like figure directed a serious look at the man and spoke quieter. From what I've heard, he single-handedly defeated Hanzo after fighting and rebelling against him for years. Since then, he's become known as a god to range shinobi, or his other name, Pain. Also, he may possess power related to his eyes. I only caught a glimpse, but from what I could see, it looked like concentric gray rings around his pupils. Madara frowned and then turned to his trusted spy with a thoughtful expression. A Jujutsu? Possible. Very interesting. The man hummed with a calculating glint in his eyes. He actually already had an idea as to what Jujutsu could it be, even though it seemed almost too good to be true. From inside his prison, the Jinchuriki observed the figures in front of him interact as if he didn't even exist anymore. Did they consider him so helpless, so insignificant, that it didn't even matter if he heard what they talked about? The thought made him scoff inwardly, but a part of him, a weak and cowardly part of him, quailed at the thought that perhaps they really were as strong as they considered themselves. In their minds, he, apparently, didn't stand as so much as a hint of chance of escaping. He had, of course, tried everything that had come to his mind to escape, but to no avail. Not that it stopped him from trying and cooking up ever more far-fetched and implausible plans. They were fools for underestimating him, and he would prove it to them by escaping. Now, if only he could work out how. Chapter 3 Conflict. Kanahagakure. I know it might seem like it doesn't change a lot, but considering relations between lightning and fire countries after the Third Great Shinobi War, it says something about our dreams of peaceful future. Spoke the older male, stroking his beard. His silver hair stood out in comparison to his dark, tan skin. He spoke kindly, with authority, managing to still look humble at the same time. His age did not take away his bearing, confidence, or invisible cloak of power that surrounded him, reminding everyone around that he used to be a fearsome shinobi once. Even though he was clothed like representative, a counselor, in expensive robes and jewelry. He discreetly observed behavior of his companion by the table. Young man, before his 30s, calmly drank tea that was presented to them, not paying attention to his surroundings, or it only seemed that way. He had barely spoken since the start of this meeting and made an impression that he was not really interested in anything his guest could offer. Why is it that so suddenly, without any warning or events prior, Kimo knocks on our gates? Hearing the eerie calm tone of the young Kage, The silver-haired man looked closer to search for any other emotion on his face than tranquility. Feeling the inspecting gaze on him, the blond man brought his startlingly blue eyes up from the cup in his hands, daring the visitor to lie. Minato smiled and gracefully put the cup down. His left hand then reached across the table to pull few of the papers closer. He graced them with a look that said he understood their meaning, and then he smirked, almost coldly, which had to be the glimpse of his true feelings and expression, and continued. Peace offering, and what timing. Just when situation with IWA is unstable and we are threatened with the beginning of a new war, Kyomo, here his tone turned sarcastic, being a generous and noble friend of ours for years, reached out with its hand, a hand in which are lying techniques, secrets from other villages, and what's the most promising, the soldiers we would need if a battle with IW ever began. The older man, not seeming disturbed in the least, replied seriously, "Isn't it an opportunity for you or for us?" The face of Yondaime turned cold, and he stood from his chair, directing his cold gaze on Kyomo Ambassador. You might try to hide your speculations behind requests of techniques, bloodline wielders, and secrets in return, but it did little good. With frown marring his face and narrowing eyes adding the effect to his angered posture, he whispered with finality, "I'm not sure yet what is behind it, but trust me, the game you play is not one I am new to. Reconsider your actions and intentions before it is too late." With that, he left the room in silence, letting the ambassador follow his movements, concealed by the Hokage mantle with gray eyes. They spoke all morning, negotiating, comparing, and definitely lying. But after this last talk, all of it seemed to be pointless in the end, as if all of this was to stall time. But for what? He was so careful, perceptive, and wary. Why hasn't he found what was it about? Or maybe it was only his imagination. Unfortunately, it wasn't a first time he overestimated something or someone, but he had no regrets. His position demanded that he made only right decisions, and if for that he had to offend some individuals, then so be it. No more mistakes. They stayed motionless, crouching on the roof of the low building in the center of the village. They watched their potential targets eat in the restaurant. It was easy to observe. Windows were not covered and glass was transparent, where windows were closed. There were only few places with so little privacy in Konoha, so that choice of a place to eat and have potentially politically important conversation was almost baffling. He and his partner were assigned to follow and observe the Kyomo ambassador and his bodyguard while they were inside the village walls. Maybe he was exaggerating, but their willingness to show they could be trusted was confusing. He didn't even have to hide while working. It was that boring. No challenge whatsoever. So what if that old cranky man preferred vegetables over meat and fish? He sighed in misery. Oh, how much he'd give just to have his beloved book in his hands and read and reread word after word of that stuff. He was sure his eye was suffering in the book's absence. But no, Yondaime-sama decided that if he had that treasure in his possession while performing missions, he deserved to be demoted to genin. Genin. He was very detailed when he explained what he meant about not having said book in his hands. It meant no reading using legs and toes, or using some crazy chakra manipulation to keep the book before his eye, other eye too, and skillfully turning its pages. No tricks. His precious was to be beyond his reach. He sighed. Why do you suddenly sound so sad, Kakashi? Cheer up, my dear friend. He sighed again. Yash, I know it will help you brighten up your youthful flames. We can't leave our assignment, but we can still do some exercises. Sit-ups and balancing on our thumbs above the ground. The one who lasts the longest is the winner. He sighed again, this time inwardly, and did all in his power to ignore his partner. God knows it was torture. He had this weird feeling it wasn't coincidental that he was often paired with this monster of the man. Sometimes he was almost sure the one behind it was Minato sensei. He did say that he was too gloomy before, and he said that he wanted to cheer him up. He replied that Minato sensei was the one who needed it then. But Hokage dismissed his advice, opting to care more about his subordinates instead. Eventually, he got over his grief, at least visibly, and continued working, but he knew the man for too long to not see how much he suffered each day, giving himself to his village. He became harsh and colder over time, refusing to live for himself. But what could he do to help? Ask Mato Guy to help his sensei? It would be a bad idea, considering Kakashi's own reactions to the man. He glanced to the side and was horrified to see Guy perform that exercise he screamed about just a minute ago. Feet up, he kept himself on the roof by standing on his left thumb. His body was slightly swinging, and his thumb was definitely white, but this eccentric Jounin was widely smiling, showing off his blindingly white teeth that, oh God, glinted in an unnatural way. It took all of his willpower not to freak out there and then. And even though he was slowly getting used to these quirks of his, it surely wasn't something he would ever wish to observe willingly. No one was ever going to think they were assigned to keep an eye on cloud representatives if they were looked upon. And even if someone ever said that aloud, no one was going to believe that. He tore his poor eye away from display of oddity. One day, when he had a proof, it was Minato Sensei's idea the man was going to pay. I am surprised with your dependability, Kakashi. You give all of your attention to our target. That is a true shinobi hip attitude. I simply am careful and conscious of our mission, Guy. There is little chance Kyomo will ever do something foolish inside our walls. It is in their best interest to appear trustworthy, profitable, and harmless. The green and orange wearing man actually managed to jump on his thumb before letting his feet touch the surface of the roof again, and Kakashi inwardly cringed at the thought of sparring with that thing. Now, how about having a spar while we observe these men? I will give it my all. Kakashi, I promise. He felt his stomach turn in protest and decided to completely ignore the green stain in his vision. You said something. Yash, your hip attitude is brighter than my flames. So when our replacement comes, we shall compare our fires of youth. My God, thought Kakashi, did I hear it right? He's getting weirder and creepier with each passing second. Somewhere in water country. He ran as quickly as he could, panting and sweating. The slight breeze did not cool his body as he entered the garden by the house. Sun rays lightened his bright blonde hairs as he shook his head and stooped at the doorway to take off small shoes. His clothes were wet as his skin, and he breathed heavily when he entered. Upon seeing him, Aiko gave a wide smile and quickly stepped closer, immediately starting taking off his t-shirt. Come on, Shirushi-chan, Change into fresh clothes. She whispered, and he looked up a bit confused. She laughed somewhat at his expression and made a motion with her head in the direction of the study to the right from them. His eyes widened in realization, and he quickly ran to his room upstairs, taking off his dirty clothes on the way. He was back in mere minutes in a white shirt and brown shorts. Before running to the office no one usually entered. It was filled with shelves holding books, scrolls, and other papers, meaning that most of this stuff belonged to the person who worked with it by the desk that was by the wall, waiting for its master. Just by the door, though, the boy slowed down and almost hesitantly knocked. There was heard a low-voiced yes, and he pushed the door open with a grin. "Dad!" The man by the desk looked up in time to see the small ball of energy he already expected rush to his side and grab his knee. "You're finally home." "Ah, good to see you too, Shirushi. How was your training?" The man asked, slowly putting away some papers and giving his attention to the boy. "Well, this morning after reading history lessons, Aiko-chan let me read about ninja history and even chakra. I can't wait to start practice. And I've done 20 laps today, more than yesterday. So I guess it's progress." "That's great," the man said. He almost couldn't believe that this child used to be an infant in his arms not too long ago. He was growing so fast that from the moment he called him daddy to this day, he felt like only days have passed. Uncomfortable, strangely warming, long days. "I want to be ninja one day, like you and like Mom." The boy mumbled the last part. The man looked away, not sure how to react to the new turn in the conversation. He knew that there was nothing he could say about Boy's parents, his true parents, but he couldn't just lie about it too, coming up with an incredulous story on how Shirushi came to life. Half of this job Aiko has already done, and the fact that he did not plan to reveal that he wasn't his biological father was beside the point. He shouldn't know that, either. "I never speak of her, so I asked Aiko." The boy muttered. He didn't want that topic to stay in the boy's mind. It was counterproductive. It caused him to ask unnecessary questions. Questions he had no answers to. It would be better if the kid kept all of his attention on him. He sighed and gently picked him up and placed on his lap. The boy was still very small, and Madara had a feeling he would never get completely used to being this close to children. He was relieved to remind himself Shirushi was an exception. "Shirushi, your mom, is not something I want to speak of, you know? I just can't." Small fingers fiddled with the fabric of white t-shirt in a show of nervousness, and the man was surprised to see the boy avoid meeting his eyes. There had to be a reason for such a change in behavior. He was ready to inquire what it was, but held it in, noticing that the blonde was ready to let some words out. It was slightly above the whisper, but he caught a note of confusion and shame. "I asked Aiko-chan if I could call her Ka-chan." The boy gulped and made a pause. She refused. The man blinked, and if it wasn't for years of perfect self-control, he would have flinched. That certainly was unexpected. Not the fact that this woman refused, but the act of devotion and love of this boy for that woman. She was so close and important to him that he viewed her as his mother. Though on second thought, it was understandable. She was always there, closer than he, his so-called father, was. She was the boy's life, and he was his dream. Unreachable father that was always busy with missions. Without a doubt, that woman was telling the kid stories about ninja, heroes, saving innocent, helpless people, and other stupid things that had impact on children's psyche. The boy would soon be asking for jutsus, and declare himself future savior of whatever or whoever. He had to work on that. When I asked her why she lied to me, he heard the continuation of the boy's little confession. It caught his attention because it was not what he was expecting to hear. What made him think she would lie to him? Did he even understand the definition of lie at this age? Kids weren't supposed to see the difference between lies or truths spoken by adults. To confirm or refute his conjectures, he decided to hear the end of this story. How exactly did she lie to you? His voice was gentle, inquiring, something that happened rarely. The blonde child glanced at him for a moment before averting his gaze. She said she couldn't let that happen. She said she knew her and it wouldn't be right, but I know that she lied. She didn't know her. What did she say about your mother? He observed as the boy turned sad and there was longing in his eyes, like he missed the person he hasn't met. She said that I look like her a lot and that she wanted me to grow to be righteous and honorable. Madara sighed inwardly. He knew it would come to this one day, but not that it would come so early. This woman had too much influence on the choices this boy will make in the future, and that meant trouble for his plans. He needed this child to be loyal, resolute, and ready to be cruel. He was not up to raising samurai, clan head, or some sort of hero from novels. He would need to speak with this woman about ideals she implanted into his child. But I know it wasn't Mom who wanted that. It's what Aiko-chan wants. Why would she lie like that? If she didn't know her, then there's no reason to say such things. Here he sounded a bit frustrated, and Madara had a feeling there were other things Aiko lied about too. It could be a comment about what his mother was like, or about him and things he does when he's not present. It wasn't much, and it wouldn't have any significant meaning if it wasn't for the boy's ability to see through it. This in itself was intriguing. I think she wanted to comfort you and tell you things you wanted to hear. I'll speak with her so that it doesn't happen again, agreed. The blonde nodded. Short blonde locks moved with his head, and Madara ran his hand through them. Tell me, how could you tell that she lied? The boy shrugged after a moment and let his eyes roam over surface of the desk, stopping his gaze on open scrolls and other papers that should not have interested him. I don't know. She just looks different when she does that. How different? The man insisted. Like, the words she said were not the words she meant? I don't know, just different. The man nodded, making a note about this little discovery in the back of his mind for later. The boy picked one of the scrolls and started to read. A moment later on his face was a grimace of discontent, and he pulled his face away from the surface of paper. What is that? The man smirked. Boring work your dad has to do. The blonde looked at the man with sympathy. Konoha. Long days of stressful work left its traces under his eyes, causing him to have shadows and wrinkles under them. How unbefitting of a man in his position. But he cared little what people thought looking at him. He was supposed to be strong, not pretty. His head was ready to fall off his shoulders, and his fingers were ready to break. Damn paperwork was killing him. It was already dark outside, and most villagers were already sleeping, and he was the sole exception, burying himself in his work. His shinobi stopped questioning his long night shifts after he made them realize there wasn't anything better for him to do. They didn't want to remind him that his son was not found, yet despite squads of trackers and information gathering ninja, he kept sending beyond Konoha's walls in his search. So as long as he had no one else to live for, he lived for the Leaf Village. Reports about the peace in Konoha eased his mind a bit, and he considered going to bed at his house, and each minute seemed to make this idea seem better. But every time he thought about his house, empty and silent, he had no wish of being there. He felt like he didn't belong, and it was practically abandoned by him, as he went there only late night to get some sleep and never stayed longer than necessary. He gave a wide yawn, stretching his sore muscles, and mused over recent development. Kyumo offering a treaty to Konoha. It didn't even sound right in one sentence. He still weighed the pros and cons of the thing, and it proved to only give him a headache. He wasn't against it, so to speak, but while he saw advantages, he could not help but see drawbacks. Since the war ended, no country or village made a step in direction of peace, no matter how official or unofficial truce between villages was. It was unspoken agreement, one that Kyumo was suddenly willing to strengthen or break with their actions. It was very unsettling. For some reason, he felt trapped, and what worse, there was no physical sign of it. It was instinct, one he acquired and improved over the years of being a shinobi. But without even a hint of what caused him to feel that way, he was helpless. He sighed heavily and decided to have some sleep when he heard quick steps sounding through the corridor outside and saw a door to his office thrown open. The chunin he placed in the squad assigned to Trail Ambassador was sweating and panting, meaning that he was running after fighting, he was tired and low on chakra, and it meant troubling news. "We had an emergency, Hokage-sama." One of Kyumo representatives attempted to kidnap the Hyuga heir. Before Kyumo received news of what transpired in Konoha due to their plan, Minato and the Sandaime formed several scenarios of their answer to that, going from turning this affair into a political issue on a wide scale to making this problem as quiet as possible. With emotions ringing inside of their hearts, not healed yet from wars and losses, the wish of showing how these kinds of actions made them feel they were ready to start a war themselves. Cloud had fallen so low, giving them a clear sign that they did not care about the repercussions. At first glance, the tactic was meant to be successful. One Kyumo Jounin left a day beforehand to deliver a message from the Hokage to the Reikage. His companions were supposed to wait for the response in Konoha, but in reality, the messenger hid in the shadows of the night and came back to stealthily kidnap the wielder of the Hyuga bloodline. If he had succeeded, no one would have blamed Kyumo, instead looking for a traitor within the village or outside responsible force. Within that plan was the action other Kyumo representatives were going to take. Wait for 2 days within Leaf before proposing to postpone the negotiations, and Konoha would have let them go, busy with internal affair concerning security. It was well thought out in its simplicity. They took many things into consideration: trackers, patrols, political rules of Leaf, even date of taking this plan into the field. They became the bait themselves for squads, making sure that shinobi were distracted while the main part of their plan would play out without their presence. But in all their carefulness, they did not give a thought to Hayashi, and that man was unstoppable when furious. With the attacker dead, Kyumo representatives in confinement, and a message to Reikage on the way, all Minato could think of was thanking gods for not letting the young Hyuga be kidnapped. He would have not been able to deal with it. Instead, he had to step carefully and place Cloud in position where they would have no advantages. And it would have worked if a day later Rakage did not send a message stating that he was not responsible for his subordinates' actions. More so, officially Cloud declared that their ninja were traitors and demanded that they had to be transferred to Lightning Country immediately. Farther, the message stated that Jounin killed by Hyuga clan head was part of the noble family, and they wanted Hayashi's head, otherwise they would start a war. In situations like these, it is best to keep your cool. You can't let emotions control your actions. Sarutobi spoke, filling his pipe with tobacco. On his face was a deep frown as he reached far into his memories and, using his experience, looked for the best solution to these circumstances. His old and tired eyes landed on the restless figure of Yondaime, standing by the window, who debated on whether or not to start a war. "You can't do this." He spoke wisely. Minato flinched. He felt like the Sandaime read his thoughts and judged every word that passed through his head. He realized that his rage was very close in allowing Cloud to manipulate him, and it was so hard to fight it. He chanced to glance behind at his predecessor and saw him sitting calmly in a chair, puffing that wooden pipe, the smoke of which he grew to like. He looked like he did not care what went on in the world and did not expect the answers to come. His knowing gaze was filled with thoughts of planning and schemes, and for a moment Minato wondered if there would come a day he looked exactly like this. The view of serenity surrounding Hiruzen calmed his nerves, and he sighed, turning his gaze away. You can't start a war each time any other nation makes a move against yours. It's illogical, mindless, and pathetic. The old man stated, almost berating village leader like he was a small child. If Minato was reacting to this in any way, he didn't show it. You have to think of your village first and foremost. Lives of your people are more important than revenge, or even, in sometimes, respect. The glass of the office window reflected Minato's jaw tightening as he grit his teeth in renewed anger. You expect me to bow to their demands. He harshly turned to face the older man, who continued to observe him in same way as minutes before. Blue-eyed man took a deep breath to keep his rage in check. He couldn't let his anger out on his most trusted advisor, and besides, Sarutobi had years and decades of experience, while he was young and easily frustrated. His anger, while cold and unforgiving, was fine in physical battles, but wrong in political ones. Right now, he was not fighting armies, but minds and politics, and he always hated politics. He accepted this position and fought for it to change Konoha, not play with its enemies. Seeing that blonde man regain control over himself again, Hiruzen decided it was safe to break the silence. I don't. You need to look at it differently. They believe that we are too weak to start the war now and would give in. All they want is to win in this situation, just like we do. But the difference is we have what they want, and they can't give us a thing we need. If in some way it is an advantage, then I don't see it yet. Minato muttered under his breath and pushed the button on device connecting him to his secretary, standing over it with thoughtful expression. The secretary answered quickly, "Where is Hayashi? I believe I called for him 2 hours ago." "He is still busy handling Hyuga clan council meetings, sir." Sandaime shook his head with a sigh, and a moment later Minato was gone, without a doubt heading to the clan compound. He was hastily walking through the corridors of compound not bothering to notice its inhabitants moving out of his way with bows of respect. He felt anger and frustration over the thought of people that were supposed to speak to him directly, ignoring his position. With a scowl, he pushed the doors to the chamber used for council of this particular clan open. What is the meaning of this? Hayashi, we were supposed to discuss this matter and not act before we came to an agreement, shouted Minato while entering the room full of Hyuga elders who did not hide their indignation at his presence in their private council room. Oh my God, Yondaime continued, hearing a woman's cry filled with pain and seeing her on her knees over the body of a man he recognized as one of Hyuga twins. He strode in their direction, ignoring others, and was shocked to find that it was Hizashi from the branch house. The only way to recognize him was the headband all branch members wore on their foreheads to cover the seal. He knelt by her and absent-mindedly checked the man's pulse. There was none. Please let us settle this matter ourselves. Yondaime-sama. Hayashi spoke from above him bitterly, but Minato could not guess if it was because of his presence or of what had transpired here. The picture was disturbing. The woman continued to cry, and he barely remembered that it was Hizashi's wife. He noticed that some elders tried to pull her away from the body, but she refused to move, letting her wails out into the cold chest of her beloved. He felt suddenly very empty, and maybe it was because on some level he knew what she felt. The loss he felt when his wife left him tore his soul apart, and when after Naruto's disappearance he realized he was all alone, he didn't want to live. He never agreed with Jiraiya when the man hinted that Minato wanted to commit suicide, but the thought crossed his mind more than once, unfortunately. He forced himself to believe over years that he had much to live for, and it kept him here among the living. If no one's going to show her. In the room filled with murmurs and whispers, he caught a soft gasp and directed his empty gaze in direction of doors he so brashly threw open, only to see a child in white clothes that was not supposed to be there. Realizing that he was caught, the pale-eyed child quickly made a step back with fear and then disappeared in the corridor. Not knowing where his energy came from, he just as quickly stood and followed him, not wanting him to be left alone with the memories of the scene he just seen. And he knew it was a bad experience because he saw those pale orbs wetting with coming tears. Children should not see these things in such a young age, and it was his fault that it happened. He was fast for his age, that was for sure, but in his stress, he stumbled few times, letting Minato grab him easily. He squirmed in his hold for some time, but eventually gave in. Minato noted that it was a boy, if somewhat girly in his appearance, but he knew it was a common trait for the Hyuga. He was shaking like a leaf in his attempt to stop his crying. All Minato could do was to settle on the corridor floor and share his pain through an embrace. Was it Hizashi's son? He couldn't remember his name. Niji. Some other member of the clan walked to them and tried to hide his surprise at seeing Hokage on the floor, holding a branch house member. The blond man looked up to acknowledge him. Hokage-sama, il est pas léger. There's no need to. The man spoke and noticed that the boy started, realizing who was trying to comfort him. He smiled sadly and let the boy stand on his feet. The other man quickly pulled the boy with him and bowed, confused about what he saw. Before they were gone, little boy lifted his teary gaze at the man who appeared to be the village leader, and thought that he could see on his face understanding, one that was shared between people who live, though, similar fates. Water country. It's been a long time since she had a chance to walk among people, hear them, and watch life continuing to shine like a flame around her. The feeling of being part of the place had left her. No longer had she felt like she belonged, even though she missed civilization. Without Shirushi, she felt completely alone. He was her life, and she belonged there, where he was. She would never deny that the boy was her son, too. She raised him. She taught him. She answered his simple questions like why the same words could be written in more than one way, or why sun changed its color throughout the day, for what the name of their country was, to the question of why they lived alone and away from other people. Today she had a rare opportunity to spend time in town. By the rays of sun breaking through white clouds, she could say it was midday, and she still had hours before she met with the boy and his father. Today was special in some ways for them. They were out in a village. She was having some free time on the condition that she would not speak about her job with villagers, and Shiru was with his father, practicing some ninja abilities, but she wasn't sure. As of late, Madara-sama started to appear more often and teach the boy. It made Shirushi happy. She was a simple civilian, so she didn't understand many things, even those the boy tried to explain to her. To her, it was just magic. She entered a park and took a deep breath in. The air smelled of life, of cafeterias nearby, where coffee woke customers. It smelled of fruits from the stalls, sold by the vendors, of candies for children that ran away from parents across park, of dogs that happily walked by their owners, of many other things she could not describe. She smiled sadly, knowing that as much as she loved it, she also learned the smell of home. The smell of house where little blonde made an impression that at least 4 other children lived there, where she was part of family, no matter how strange it seemed. She had an impression that she was followed, but she was not concerned. If she was, then probably it was to make sure she did not break the rules. She wouldn't. He was officially bored. What was so special about seeing people make unnecessary expressions or lies? Maybe these people had a reason for keeping quiet about something. They had a right to that, didn't they? He pulled the yellow strand of hairs from the front of his face and glanced over his shoulder at the window. It wasn't raining. He could be running around searching village for anything interesting instead of sitting in this office and watching Dad working. He looked to the side. The man was relaxed, quiet. He kept reading files and scrolls, signing and stamping here and there. He never seemed to get tired of it, though he was visibly bored as much as he himself was. He worked in gloves, black. It seemed strange, but Shira didn't question it. The man rubbed his left eyelid before sighing and continuing. The boy observed his every move, wondering if he should mention that he knows that father's left eye was different from the right one. It was obvious because it was dimmer, fogged in some way, like it wasn't his at all. He noticed it before, but if it meant practicing this new ability on unknown boring people that visited his dad like today, he would rather not. There was a knock on the door, and with confirmation, a ninja entered. It was a man around 20s with brown hair and green eyes, small beard on his chin, an expressionless face. His clothes were all black, even his bandages on shins and wrists. He had a short sword on his back, but most of his weapons were in pouches on his hips and arms. Was it easier to get them from there? Are you sure that I shouldn't be seen by these ninja? I don't think they would like for someone to eavesdrop on your conversations. He asked, turning to his father. The man smirked, which meant he was not going to change it. He placed Shirushi under an illusion, making him invisible and unheard by anyone beside the two of them. He would listen to the boy when he noticed a lie in someone's speech and try to look for a way to catch it himself. Even when he already came to a conclusion, it was part of bloodline ability. At times it surprised him how he could miss a well-placed word or a tone of the voice, not to mention the skill in hiding emotions and controlling body language that was important for shinobi of high rank. Shirushi didn't miss a thing. It was like he could read those people as if it was natural. But he knew there was more than that. The boy also loved symbols and kanji. He liked to watch, read, and touch them, like he understood some hidden meaning. He didn't speak of it yet, so Madara would have to entice the boy into telling him what he saw. It wasn't easy considering the kid was often mischievous. For him, playing games was fun, while Madara had to put up with his riddles. Not that he wasn't like that himself. The man in the office gave his report, not knowing that by the desk was sitting not only his leader, but a boy too, and the child mentioned every word he said with ill intention. And he's hiding something too. The blonde finished, leaning with his head on the stack of papers in front of him. How can you know that? The man by the desk raised a brow without taking his eyes away from a jounin he sent on a mission 2 weeks ago. The boy grinned. That's a secret. Madara glanced at the child and suppressed a slight shiver crawling up his skin. If it wasn't for a fact that he knew the boy, he would have said the kid was intimidating, or would turn out to be in the future. Unknown location. From the moment that two-colored thing appeared, he knew something was different. He knew it wouldn't be like any other day. He couldn't say exactly why he knew there was a difference. He wasn't sure it came with being ninja or Jinchuriki, or just powerful enough to be called Kage. He always had this skill of noticing things other people ignored. But that didn't mean it would save his life. It never meant he would be faster or stronger than others. It only gave him an edge, one he needed more than ever. He didn't know what exactly to expect, but whatever was going to come, he was too weak to fight it. It weren't months since he was imprisoned, closed in a cage, but years. His body was barely responsive, chakra inaccessible, and he had lost his reflexes. If he had to fight, he would be successfully beaten by an academy student. He had no emotions at the thought of this now. He passed the point where his weakness made him angry, and instead he counted his chances of surviving or running away. Seeing the plant-like figure work with a strange device in its hands, he became a little worried. All his planning was meant to have at least few seconds of freedom. If a short freedom was out of his reach, then death would be better than anything else planned by his captor. The figure pressed some point on the small, metallic device and threw it through the bars. It clanged, hitting the floor 2 times. He stood up, absently noticing that the figure disappeared through the floor. It went away from it. The smoke rose from it. And then he realized it was gas. They wanted to put him to sleep. Was it to move him to some other place? He barely had time to think as it forced him to lose focus. And then he was unable to do anything but fall and lose his grip on consciousness. Thoughtless and colorless, emptiness of his mind slowly filled with image. He was lying on the ground. Under the light coming from the creature he took power from in his hardest battles. The monster was above him, green in color of its appearance, and its chakra. Strangely, it wasn't as menacing as before. He felt its understanding and wisdom. He even felt its care, no matter how small it was. Its power was hitting him through his being, and he knew that while he fell and had no power to stand, it always was and always will be unbeaten. With feeling of accomplishment, he gave the demon a smile, and his right hand reached up. He wasn't in the cell any longer, surrounded by those seals. While his body was trapped, his mind was free. His fingers touched wide, surprisingly soft material over Creature's neck. Even though this collar was black in color, it was light and flexible, like chakra. He had no hesitation grabbing it and pulling with all his might, willing to break the curse both of them bore. It tore and finally broke, vanishing through his fingers. Then his vision was filled with blinding light. Unknown country. He only saw the backs of figures as they walked down the street through the small town. It was a family. They smiled and spoke to each other. Their shadows on the ground were long. The sun was close to setting. He followed them because he still had hope. There were three of them, mother, father, and a child. It was about 4 years old, just like he should be by now. It had blonde hair, and he thought he saw those eyes were blue, but he couldn't be sure. It was a boy. His parents were blondes too, but he still held onto that small hope. The woman stopped to speak to another woman who walked in their direction. They knew each other, it seemed, and commented on their looks. He walked by, trying to seem like he was usual civilian, old white-haired man in wooden sandals, and watched their interaction. His gaze traveled down to the child who was held by a father, a merchant probably. His heart beat faster with each second as he got closer and closer, and a world seemed to stop when the kid turned his head in his direction. Just as blonde, as small, he looked up at passerby with green, shiny eyes, and the old man hastily walked away, berating himself for being irrational. He was slowly going crazy like his student. Every blonde child was his godson, and he was starting to creep people out with his stares. He mentally gave himself a slap to regain his senses and cursed under his breath. Shouldn't he give up by now? It's been years, for to be exact, and there was no sign of finding Minato's son. Any normal shinobi would move on with their life. But they were not normal, and the child was special. Somewhere in water country. Thickness, whiteness of the fog. It was hard to breathe. Traveling through water was tiring. They had to be quiet, fast, and unnoticed. It was hard, since they traveled for days with only short breaks. The weather was on their side, mist was everywhere, and sky was covered in dark clouds. Once they reached the strange area where fog was thicker than elsewhere, they decided to use it to cover their traces, but finding a land engulfed in illusion of some sorts that hid it from onlookers, they had their doubts. On one side, it meant that they were in ninja territory. On the other, that meant they could use it to get away from pursuers that were a day or two behind them. Though risky, their choice was obvious. They decided to use their last strength to enter the land and leave it, pulling their pursuers in the trap, while they were sure to stay away from possible threat. After all, it was all or nothing. The land was identical to the others, with lots of plant life and water. But they couldn't break the feeling it was strange. Here, they were running away from Kiri as bloodline wielders, looking for shelter for a moment, and they got the whole land under their feet where was no sign of inhabitants. They entered gently and carefully to keep the Jinjutsu intact, but would it be likely for them to get out of it just as easily? Their questions were answered when they found a house. Someone lived or hid there, but they were not interested in this. All they needed was to continue traveling to enter other country where they could ask for asylum. They stayed in the tree line and among the branches to avoid getting spotted. It helped that they had blue and green robes, making them merge with the trees. They moved further with intention of crossing the land and did not expect a stone to hit the tree by them. Quick scanning of surroundings explained it with the small boy that was on the ground, observing them with curiosity. "Who's there?" Their leader, the oldest man amongst them, cursed. They were not supposed to be spotted. How could they be seen by a kid? They made no noise and were too camouflaged to be noticed among the branches. Furthermore, what a child was doing in here. This place had to belong to someone, some family or clan. The boy called out again, and the man moved faster than the eye could see, snatching the boy away from there and into the foliage. They were still too close to the building, and they didn't need the kid to announce that someone was there. "The hell are you doing? We have to get out of here." One of them whispered harshly, seeing the child squirm in the hold of the man who held a hand over his mouth. Half of them were wearing masks covering their faces, others were wearing hoods. It helped hide their identity. "Keep quiet. We can't leave any witnesses. He saw us, so we have to get rid of him." The older man spoke with authority and forcefully turned the kid to face him. The boy struggled against him and looked up with a frown and fear in his features, which they stared at with surprise. "Damn, he's one of us. What is he doing here? Shouldn't he and any others have ran away by now?" Was a quiet whisper, which clearly belonged to a woman. Another one landed by them and took a look at the blonde. The boy looked closely and saw that this man had big brown eyes and soft, pale skin. His hair and the rest of his body were covered. The man hummed and tilted his head. "It is a bloodline, but I've never seen one like that in Mist." The one holding the kid pulled the blonde strands of hair to force the child to look at him. The boy would have hissed in pain if his mouth wasn't covered. "We can sell him. He's young, easy to shape into ninja. Any other village would gladly take us in with something resembling the Sharingan or that other eye from Leaf, the Byakugan." "You can't do this. He's just a kid." The woman cried an outburst, grabbing the man's shoulder. "That, or we simply kill him." He answered and started to leave. They followed him after slight hesitation, but did not go against it. The boy wriggled in the grasp and managed to bite the man's hand. The leader grunted, landing with the kid on the ground. "Let me go." "Ah." The other male scowled and tried to knock out the blonde, but he was stubborn and tried to get away from them, even though he knew it was pointless. "Shirishi?" "Shiru." They looked in direction of the house and saw a woman in a light, white dress run out. She was frightened, and it was easy to tell she was with the child. One of hooded shinobi made few quick hand seals, and out of the air sharp needles, seemingly from ice, shot in her direction. She barely dodged, moving aside at the last second with widened eyes. "What are you doing? We can't leave a trace of being here. Don't use clan techniques." The masked, shorter male shouted, and seeing the woman rise through Kanai with a flip of his wrist. The blonde boy stared at her falling body in shock. One moment she was running an attempt to help him, the other, she was descending to the ground dead. The knife was in her chest, exactly where her heart should be. Around it, fabric of her dress was soaking in her blood. Her eyes were suddenly empty and lifeless. Did she just die? No, she was killed. He stared at her form, not comprehending what had happened. He couldn't pay attention to the fact that the same people were dragging him away from her, away from the home. If they take him, how will his father find him? He felt like he had lost his ability to speak or shout. No one would hear him. On this island, for most of the time, he and Aiko were alone. He was alone. They were bad people. They didn't kill her on orders like most shinobi would do. They took him to sell him, not caring who he was. And now they were running away God knows where. Why? Chapter 4, son. The unexpected death of three-tailed beast Jinchuriki was too troublesome. It meant that he could no longer play the role of the young leader of Mist. After official reports and witnesses of the demon gracing the land with its walk, everyone would understand that Yagura was dead and the monster was unsealed. He couldn't go back to the office, but at least his actions destroyed that country, giving him a feeling of contentment, accomplishment. He did not plan to lose time, so he and Nagato worked on the methods of resealing the beast. It wasn't easy, considering the amount of chakra it would take. Also, the statue for gathering bijou had its shortcomings. They needed at least 6 powerful shinobi to successfully use the sealing technique, and even then, the process would take 3 days. There were 4 of them, and it irritated him that there were 3 shinobi aware of his existence. Zetsu just worked for him on his own free will. That said it all. He was interested in Madara's plans and was generally bored without something to do. Nagato was a different story. That naive man wanted peace. It took lots of thinking to persuade him that Madara wanted peace too, only he planned to reach it by war. It was surprising how easily some individuals could be manipulated if you had convincing arguments. People tend to feel fear and fear pain, but only knowing that pain, they will fear it to a point where they avoid it. Let people learn pain of war, pain of losing, and they will do all in their power to prevent it from happening again. And then, only then, will people learn the true meaning of peace. There was no need to convince his partner, Conan. The woman was loyal to Nagato, and if he changed his views, she would do the same. She learned to depend on him and follow his plans. And if Nagato decided that capturing Jinchuriki of the Bijou was a step to obtaining means for creating peace, then she would agree. But now all of them knew his face, his name, and status. It was wrong. He wasn't ready to discard his own safety and peace. Letting others know of his true identity was too risky. He hadn't been hiding for years for nothing. That was why he planned to change his tactics. They needed more people, powerful shinobi to be exact. Logically, you couldn't take shinobi from other villages. They were loyal to their leaders, so you had to gather these shinobi without them being tied. The answer? Missing means, and it meant money and goals. It meant forming a group, organization, and an organization needed a leader. Oh, no. He never planned on taking that position. Too risky, too obvious, too easy to spot. But then it meant forming and creating bases, schemes, and he got a headache. He couldn't do all of that. Or could he? He stopped in his tracks, realizing that the beast roaming free in water country brought trouble. He had an island with his private place, And if he wasn't ready to get the demon under control, he had to change its location. And if he planned to form some sort of organization, Nagato could always become its official leader. And as he was also the leader of AIM, the first base could always be formed there. Not a bad idea. Now, if they could get more members, there was a failed attempt at killing the Mizukage, him in disguise, a short time ago. After that, the group known as the Seven Ninja Swordsmen of the Mist fell apart. There were only two members of that group that, one, were not taking part in attack, and two, were strong enough to be considered as an addition to his new organization he had been thinking of forming. He smirked and continued on his way to the highest tower in Rain Village. He wouldn't have to show his face to any more people. Uchiha Madara, he died long ago. He couldn't be a leader of any organization. Nagato could be. They decided to take a short break. Two of them stayed on alert, ready to act if the enemy showed up in their line of vision. Up until now, no one caught up with them. They were in wave country or close to it. Traveling on water for a very long time was almost stupid, but in doing so, there was no risk of anyone knowing of direction they traveled in. Their chakra reserves were incredibly low, so they took breaks in turns, glad that Fire Country was not too far away. They were not surrounded by mist anymore, and their vision was clear. The swamps of wave were like traps protecting them from all sides. They didn't start a fire to avoid getting attention, and were reveling in their almost successful escape. They were only days away from their freedom. The blond boy keenly observed his captors, not making a sound. They tied his hands, fingers, and mouth. Not that it changed that much. He didn't know any jutsu yet, so he wouldn't attack them with one or use one to break free. And he wasn't stupid enough to annoy these ninja with his speech, so even if he could make a noise, he would still opt to observe them. Sometimes they would speak to each other using hand signs, mainly for two reasons: to make as little noise as possible and to separate him from conversation. But they didn't know he understood most of it anyway, as well as hand signs they used for techniques they were forced to use. For the most part, it confused the boy, as he would rather call their actions a speech. What was the point in speaking while using chakra? It was confusing. He saw them use chakra in ways he wasn't aware of before. Walking on water and increasing speed by that were things he vowed to learn too. But they did not seem to see chakra like he did, and their eyes were usual too. It was a small advantage on his part, but meant little in these conditions. One of resting men scowled at the blonde and narrowed his eyes. "What are you looking at, Brad?" The boy blinked and tilted his head, making it seem like he didn't understand why the man addressed him. A woman walked by and shot her comrade a short glare. "Leave him alone." The man tisked, deforming his lips, and slightly shook his head. "He's watching us." "He's just a kid," she replied tiredly. The man directed his gaze at the tide, boy, and muscles on his face tensed. Kids his age behave differently. They're scared, lonely, terrified. Children do not eye their captors like predators. And he's studying us. Like he understands who we are, what we do, and why. The young man behind a tree laughed, keeping his stare on surroundings. "Aren't you exaggerating a bit? Damn, I didn't know you would be scared of a toddler." "I don't like his eyes." "You want to speak of my likes and dislikes, man?" The younger male replied. Their group was silent after that. Water country. Silence. It was the first thing that greeted him. No shouting, smiling, hugging and laughs. The house was empty, and a feeling of coldness confused him. Usually, they waited for him, and his presence made Aiko and Shirushi incredibly happy. Now, he felt like he was in a different place. Walking outside, he noted the air was humid, and a storm of sorts was close to area. His island would be fresh after the rain, and he thought about staying here for more than one day. He abruptly stopped seeing a dead body among the grass on the ground. For a short moment, he was frozen as his thought process was stopped. Her skin was extremely pale, eyes opened, still staring in direction of a tree line. She had that white dress on, with miniature yellow flowers. It was her favorite. She often put it on, knowing that she looked younger in these colors. Sometimes, she seemed to try to get his attention. Maybe she thought that he was a lonely and sad man, with money and power, and a son she was raising. Or maybe, away from other people and home, she forced herself to believe she loved him, and it eased her worry. She was too kind. She never mentioned anything about her predicament. She never hinted that she wanted anything. She said she loved the boy. She said Madara made her happy. Always. She always said the same, with a smile on her face, like an angel that lived with a sole purpose of making others happy. If there was anything she wanted to do, it was to give more of her never-ending love. But he never let her get closer. No matter how good intentions she had, he didn't want it. She said once that he built a wall around his heart. She said that if he wouldn't stop, he would become a monster. She was in tears then, shaken after receiving his refusal in answering her questions. He didn't say that he became a monster long ago, and it did not matter. But sometimes he asked himself why she wanted to change him so much. Was it for the boy? He crouched by the body and tilted his head, inspecting it. She was killed by Shinobi. Now that he concentrated, he could sense the remainder, traces of chakra, different from his and Shiru's. It was even somewhat familiar. He looked up and slowly rose. With realization that the blond boy was not here and might have been taken, he made steps further in direction of the chakra. When after walking through bushes and trees, he stopped, he finally remembered where he felt that energy before. His fingers touched the thick grass below, and he noted that there must have been a window. There were only few shinobi around who could enter Jinjutsu-filled area undetected and leave it in the same fashion. These had to be ice users. They killed the woman using a kunai, so they didn't want to attract attention. They were running away? How stupid. He scowled. It's been 2 days since Aiko was dead. If they traveled fast and barely used any techniques, he wouldn't be able to find them. And 2 days was a lot when it came to shinobi trained, since they were able to walk. He could care less who they were and what they wanted, but if it involved his property, it was a personal matter. This place was his, and that woman served him, and the boy was definitely his and no one else's. He hummed, thinking on how to track the offenders. It wasn't often he cared enough to be in a hurry. Finding and asking Zetsu wasn't a good idea. He sent him on a different mission just hours ago, and letting him know who he wanted to be found didn't sound good. But anyone else was not fit for that kind of job, unless... Here he shut his eyes tightly and grit his teeth, asking himself if he really cared enough about the boy to do this. After all, it's been years. He rubbed his chin furiously, thinking if he should take the risk, and seconds passed by, as he was tormented by his indecision. He paced left and right, making short, senseless steps as his mind was busy with comparing loses and wins he'd make if he followed one or another choice. In the end, minutes later, he audibly sighed, letting his Uchiha nature win, where his possessions were more important than the means. He bit his thumb and made hand seals with precision. His right hand touched the ground, and after a circle of symbols appearing under his palm, there was a puff of smoke. Before it dispersed, the voice spoke from within. "I thought that day would never come, Madara. It's nice to know you still remember me, Hanar," he replied, standing. With wind blowing the smoke away, it was revealed that first voice belonged to an animal, large and dark brown. It had light yellow eyes and proud posture. Its long, bushy tail was wrapped around its paws. It was a fox, muscled and visibly trained, and the animal was scowling at its summoner with displeasure. "To what do I owe the honor of being summoned?" it asked with bitterness, sounding insulted. The man sighed again and looked down. "I wouldn't ever summon you if I didn't need you, right? And I didn't need you for years." "Choose your words carefully, Madara. You never needed help from our clan. You weren't interested in having partners in foxes. All you wanted was our grandmaster, Kyubi-sama." The fox spoke, baring sharp teeth. "You disgraced our kind, breaking our connection with the human world and breaking your word." The man nodded, staying silent. His posture was tense, and after eyeing him up and down, the animal snorted. "You'd never summon me if you could avoid it. It'd be an insult to your power. What could have possibly happened to the almighty Uchiha Madara that he had to resort to summoning? I need to track someone, and I don't have too much time for this." The animal frowned and turned its head to the side. "It's unlike you." The man stayed quiet, waiting. "Who is it you are looking for, and what would you give in exchange for my services? Understand that your name is cursed in our clan, and we will not serve you if it's not in our interests." He hesitated before speaking, but inwardly slapped himself to come to senses. "I'm looking for my son." The fox looked up in disbelieving gaze, its forehead furrowed in confusion. "It's a long story. What do you want in exchange for your help?" Hanar lowered his head, thinking. The human world has no memory of our clan, has no respect for us. Humans do not realize we exist and have more power than other summons. We want our glory, fame, and recognition back. The fox looked up seriously. "Give us a summoner, one that has potential, battles to fight, and deserves our support." The man was still for a minute. If they wanted a new summoner, it meant that once they had one, he would be erased from the contract, something that didn't happen yet due to him being the only connection to human realm the clan had. They had a right to do this, he knew that, but he still needed them. He had to find Kyubi. His greatest summon was defeated by Yondaime and by unknown technique, and any sources he had claimed that the nine-tailed fox was gone, and there was no object or human host in Konoha that contained the demon. Fox Clan from Summoning Realm was one of the few connections to the beast he had left. He needed their knowledge, and the first step he had to make was to fix the tense relations between them. It was true that he betrayed their trust, and giving them a new summoner was the least he could logically do. "I understand. You may choose anyone you want." The animal nodded. It let its gaze travel over surroundings and sniff the air. The brown tail with yellow tip started to dance above the ground. "Let's start hunting. Wave country. Pain. Fire. He couldn't open his eyes as they were too heavy. His skin was covered in sweat. He was confused with the cold he felt outside of his body, an uncontrollable feeling of burning inside. He was trembling as sharp pain traveled from his lungs to his stomach, and then appeared in his heart, and again in his side. What did this boy do to him? Flashes of memories blurred in his vision, from the moment where he fought with his comrades about killing the child to the moment when he wanted to close the boy's eyes himself. He was brash, aggressive, and it scared the blonde. The boy tried to get away, but was unsuccessful. His large hand covered the eyelids of the boy, and then he heard his own screaming when strange, thick and red haze covered his hand, burning it till it turned black. For him, it was only proof that the child was too dangerous, but his comrades viewed it as the sign of power and forced him to accept the fact that they would keep the boy alive to sell him. Another flash of memory showed as he screamed in pain later, cursing bloodlines. Only one of them was a medic, and concluded that his hand was not only burned, but poisoned, which had something to do with his weakening chakra network. That poison affected his body, so he was drugged when that idiot cut his hand off to save his life. It didn't help. It wouldn't help even if his entire arm was cut off. Everything was on fire. His own blood was boiling inside, threatening to explode from inside of him. He was losing his mind. So when that foolish sister of the medic started to protect the boy, stating that he protected himself and it wasn't his fault one of them was suffering, he snapped. He wanted to kill that child, maybe to protect his comrades or have revenge. But again, she tried to stop him. He was enraged when he attacked her, feeling that she betrayed them. And she, unlike him, didn't suffer. Her death was quick and cold, like ice. He was gritting his teeth to stay quiet as he was slowly dying before their eyes. Then he started to curse himself. Because of him, they were slowed down and couldn't travel as fast. He was a burden. They didn't trust him any longer after his actions. His half-opened eyes searched their faces to see detachment, sadness, and in some of them, pity. They have already buried her body and did that with care and remorse. They knew that they could hide her scent in some ways, but those methods would be a sign of disrespect and cruelty, which she did not deserve, unlike him. He was in agony when they said their last words to him, some of them forgiving him, others staying uncomfortably silent. And all this time, the child was there. They covered his sight with material to make sure that incident did not repeat itself. But to him, it seemed like the boy kept watching. His face was blank, like he had no emotions or reaction to what was happening. For all the time he was with them, he barely spoke, which was even more confusing. He was tied, had his eyes closed, he could do nothing and was a helpless child. And still, unexplainably so, it felt like there was more to his behavior and ability than at the first glance. The blade of kunai slid across his sweat-covered neck silently, and he was dead when his body was dragged into the swamp nearby. He didn't feel its coldness or the way it pulled him deeper. His skin was covering itself in his own blood, as his form was disappearing within the marsh created by nature. It was his grave, where his scent, chakra, and personal secrets were hidden from the world forever. Nature was not on their side. Winds, waters, and time took away the traces of scent, chakra, and any other activity. They had to travel across waters surrounding the country blindly. Then, deducing that shinobi traveled to wave and fire countries, they blindly searched for signs of them being anywhere along the border. And when they did, it wasn't something he was expecting. The first thing they found was a body. It was a woman buried about a day or so ago. What confused him were her wounds. The one who inflicted them possessed the same bloodline she had. Humming and storing that information for later, Madara sealed the body in a scroll, thankful that temperature of earth below was low, keeping the skin intact. His curiosity led him to believe he could study the differences between this clan and other shinobi. He was especially interested in comparing them to Senju, even though any comparison was far-fetched. He was surprised how eagerly Hanar followed the scents, sometimes too eagerly for his own likes, but he was thankful for that. In the end, by midday, they caught up with them on the border to Fire Country, where they managed to be witnesses of negotiation between refugees and border patrol. There were 4 shinobi they trailed from Water Country, with one of them missing, while the other they found dead. One of them, possibly a leader, held a boy in place by his side. Madara scowled, seeing his hands and fingers tied, and his eyes covered. His clothes, which had to be the same he was in the day he was taken, were dirty and torn. His usually vibrant expressions, filled with joy, were replaced with detachment and coldness. The anger rose within him, seeing the hand of that worthless man touch the child that could be touched by him only. His gaze shifted onto the figures of the Leaf Shinobi. There were 3 of them by the refugees, and he also noted that 2 more were hidden in the trees. All 5 of them were from low to high Jounin level, which was surprising. Wouldn't the Leaf rather send a team of Chunin under a Jounin commander? They must have had a mission of sorts in this area, and an important one, seeing their number and skill level, though they were clothed like standard Jounin, not AMBU. He narrowed his eyes at implications of that. It would have been better if he caught his quartet without any witnesses, but now he had little choice. Wait till he could attack them when they were not in company of the Leaf Shinobi, or attack now, each and every one of them. He almost snarled when one of Shinobi on patrol laughed at something the ice user said, and stepping close to the boy, lifted the cloth off his eyes. With curiosity, the Leaf Ninja, one after another, looked into the purple orbs as the boy glared at them with ferocity. Now he shouldn't wait till they left. They saw something they had no right of seeing. He couldn't let them spread the information about existence of the new Jujutsu. He barely noticed Hanar growl as he rushed ahead with the speed that left his image disappearing. Unnoticed, he stole up to 2 of Konoha Shinobi under cover and got rid of them without a sound, using a chain to successfully stifle them. Then, even faster, he slit the throats of 3 other Jounin. They didn't know what happened as they fell on the ground dead. And with a glint of bloodlust in his eyes and a blood-covered blade in his hand, he faced those that were the cause of his headache for the last 3 days. The refugees regained their mobility in mere seconds after witnessing the fast defeat of their potential escort and protectors. 3 pairs of hands formed seals, and they reached for weapons. Thanks to their bloodline, they had the speed that was rare among shinobi, but even they could not stop the gashes that appeared on their bodies in a blink of an eye. Crimson liquid covered the black sleeves of his cloak, and he shook the blood off the blade that started to slide over the handle. He turned to the last one, who was panting in uncertainty as he held the edge of kunai very close to the neck of the child. His pale forehead was marred by the deep frown, and he made hesitant steps back, fearful of the killer whose red eyes murderously glared. Hanar was intently watching the scene, keeping his gaze on the boy. Since the beginning, he could smell that he was not Madara's child. Usually, someone sent could tell which pack he belonged to, as families often shared certain traits. The boy didn't smell like Madara, and neither looked like him, but he could tell there was a bond between them, if the man's actions were anything to go by. And that wasn't all that had his attention. The child, it smelled differently, and at the same time, he could tell it was human, but with something inhuman about him. It was the reason he was so intent on finding and meeting the boy. There was a connection the boy might have with summons or summoning realm in general, but he couldn't pinpoint that. Also, it seemed Madara himself didn't know of it, as he hasn't mentioned it nor gave a hint. The fox lowered its head and stared at the violet eyes. He wouldn't tell the Uchiha that the boy was special in that way. The last ice user trembled under the powerful gaze and was shocked to see as his right hand, which previously held the blade at the boy's throat, slowly rose. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the killer, and it was a puzzle at the back of his mind as presently he noticed that his right hand came dangerously close to his own neck. There was a second of realization when suddenly, without understanding, he willingly plunged the metal in the base of his throat. The stream of blood that followed that action reached the boy's shoulder, where it became stains of color. Still with the shocked expression, the man dropped on the ground dead. For a moment, Madara was still, and then he finally looked down at the boy. It was unknown if Shiru saw a monster then, or a savior. He was still shocked after the death of his surrogate mother, confused about his kidnapping, and terrified of the thought of becoming a slave and never seeing his father again. The cold fire in man's eyes softened, and he stepped closer to the blonde, moving down on one knee. Without hesitation, the boy slowly reached him and wordlessly hid his face in the man's chest. He sighed with relief, glad that after all that happened his son recognized him. Thinking of the blonde as his child was still new to him, but he was getting used to it, seeing as he couldn't help it after all this time. He embraced him gently and severed the bonds on his hands. The blonde's hands quickly found their place on the man's shirt, and he held the fabric in a tight grip. He rose with the boy in his arms and, pressing his face to the top of his head, quietly inhaled his smell, the smell of young, warm, and pure. And it was his. He was surprised that he even hesitated before going after the captors. His son was worthy of his worry, hurry, and care. "Dad," the boy whispered with confirmation and relaxed, finally feeling that he was safe. The fox rose from its sitting position and walked to them. It ignored the bodies on the ground and stopped in front of the black-clad man. They exchanged calm but serious gazes, and the animal spoke. "Summon me 2 days from now. We shall discuss the terms of the deal." At Madara's nod, the fox disappeared in a puff of smoke.